Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Soni Millbrook. Soni Millbrook was born on February 15, 1981, in Memphis, Tennessee, USA. She is the daughter of Christine Millbrook Bennett and grew up in a large family with many siblings, having 2 sisters and 3 brothers. This warm and close-knit environment helped her build a special relationship with her cousin Jenny during her teenage years. Soni became a popular student at her high school. In 1998, when she was 17 years old and in the 11th grade, she met a man named Lakeith Moody, who was older than her. She soon began a relationship with him. However, the relationship was not a happy one, as Lakeith was abusive and violent, leaving visible injuries on Soni's body. Despite this, they had 4 children, 3 girls and a boy named after his father. In 1999, Soni's mother discovered a bruise on Soni's chest. When her mother asked her about it, Soni cried and confessed that Lakeith had caused the injury. A friend of Soni's also witnessed the injury, but Soni refused to report Lakeith's behavior to the police. Lakeith often controlled Soni and tried to isolate her from her friends and family. That same year, Soni moved into an apartment in the Fraser neighborhood of Memphis. One day, the management informed her of an incident at her apartment. When she arrived, she found a chaotic scene: damaged furniture, missing clothes, a destroyed television, food smeared on the walls, and personal hygiene products scattered everywhere, including under the stairs. Strangely, the mirror had the words, "Kiki loves you," with Kiki being Lakeith's nickname. Lakeith's behavior made Soni's relatives even more concerned. On October 31, 2000, Soni and her cousin, Pamela, went to a bar called The Mirage with Lakeith. While at the bar, Lakeith became aggressive towards Soni by slapping her and throwing a drink in her face. After the incident, Soni and Pamela left the bar and got into their car. According to Pamela, Soni was shaken and frightened by Lakeith's actions. Soni asked Pamela to take her home immediately because she was afraid that Lakeith would come after them. When Soni got home, she locked the door securely. An hour later, Lakeith came to the house, yelling and banging on the door. Pamela had to threaten to call the police to make Lakeith leave. Once Soni calmed down, her cousin decided to leave her alone. However, that evening, Pamela received a call informing her that Soni had been hospitalized. Lakeith had forced his way into the house, and when Soni tried to end the relationship, he attacked her. He tore off Soni's clothes and hit her on the head, face, chest, arms, and between her thighs. She suffered bruises all over her body, loose teeth, and even lost consciousness because Lakeith choked her until she passed out. Lakeith later accidentally discovered that Soni was on birth control pills, and he attacked her again. The next morning, Soni called Pamela and asked her cousin to take her to the hospital because of serious health problems. In late 2008, Soni, then 27, worked at a Christian institute. She was considered a reliable and punctual employee. Therefore, when she took time off or missed work, it was usually due to important reasons. Once, she called her supervisor to report that she could not come to work because her face was badly bruised, and she did not want the children to see it. After she asked for a day off, Director Leslie approved it. However, when Soni returned a few days later, the bruises were so obvious that the director allowed her to wear sunglasses while working at the academy. Lakeith's violence not only affected Soni and their children but also caused concern in the community. In April 2008, Lakeith was found sitting in an SUV with a gun in his hand, despite being previously prohibited from owning a gun due to a criminal record. Furthermore, he had previously served 2 years in prison for burglary and 3 years in prison for drug possession with intent to distribute. Soni tried to avoid her boyfriend, but it was almost impossible. The situation came to a head on October 6, 2008. At that time, Sony did not arrive at the academy by 5 p.m. Her sister received a text message from Sony saying that Lakeith was holding her hostage in his home and had been beating her all day. Sony also provided her home address. Sony's sister called the police. 2 officers went to Sony's house. They knocked on the door, but there was no answer since it was locked from the inside. They then called the security department to unlock the door. When the police entered the house, they saw Sony's boyfriend jumping out of the back window of the apartment. Sony stood in the hallway, crying and unable to speak because of her grief. Her 4 children were also present, making for a very heartbreaking scene. Sony's face and neck were covered in bruises and scratches. When she calmed down, Sony explained what had happened. Sony and Lakeith began arguing, and he refused to let her leave the house. She told the police that Lakeith would not let her or the children near the window. She also said that Lakeith injured one of their children by grabbing the child and preventing her from taking the child to the hospital. Sony said that her boyfriend had been both physically and verbally abusive. During one altercation, he tied a baby blanket around her neck and choked her until she lost consciousness. When the police arrived, Lakeith threatened to choke her again and said he would kill her if the police did not let him go. The police searched the area but did not find Lakeith. Sony then left the house with the children in her car. 3 days later, she filed a restraining order against Lakeith, fearing for her life and wanting to prevent any contact with him. However, she missed the hearing, and the protective order was never granted. Nearly 6 months later, on March 10, 2009, Sony was still in contact with Lakeith. That day, he was supposed to pick up the children for a doctor's appointment, but instead, he began arguing with Sony, accusing her of having a new boyfriend. The argument quickly turned violent as he slapped her and pulled her hair. She tried to break free and ran out of the apartment while Lakeith screamed and threatened to kill her. Lakeith did not catch Sony but instead kidnapped their youngest child, an infant, and drove away at high speed. A police patrol alerted to the domestic disturbance arrived as Lakeith was running away. The officers attempted to stop him, but he escaped. In early 2010, Sony, 28, was studying at Southeast Tennessee Community College. She had to stay home to care for her 5th child, who was 9 weeks old, because of poor health. In January, Sony and the children moved into the Budget Lodge in Memphis. However, on the first day Sony moved in, she and Lakeith's arguments became so loud that motel staff had to intervene because they were disturbing other guests. Sony and Lakeith could not maintain a peaceful relationship. They argued constantly, disturbing neighbors and management with the noise. On January 22, a hotel security guard witnessed Lakeith in a very agitated state. He arrived at a high rate of speed in Sony's car and then began yelling at her as she stood on the second-floor balcony with the children. In his anger, he threw a bag of groceries at her. The security guard arrived and told Lakeith not to make any noise or throw things in the hotel. Lakeith was instructed to settle the argument in his room. However, Lakeith told the security guard that he did not need to worry about it. Lakeith then locked his car and accompanied the security guard to an unoccupied room on the 3rd floor. The security guard asked Lakeith to hand over any hotel keys he had. Surprisingly, Lakeith had keys to 3 different rooms, even though he was not registered as a guest. The next day, Lakeith and Sony moved into room 222 with their children. However, the night manager asked Lakeith to leave that evening. Although Lakeith left as requested, he soon returned. The arguments between Sony and Lakeith continued for several more days until the guard asked Lakeith to leave the hotel for good. As Lakeith left, the front desk clerk tried to calm him down. The guard also warned Lakeith not to come back that night. Lakeith got into her car and drove away. Some time later, Sony spoke to Pamela and confided that she was having problems in her life. She was staying at the motel and wanted to talk to Pamela about something important. Sony said that she would call if she left the motel or if her boyfriend left first. The next day started normally. At 7 a.m., Sony took the younger children to daycare and the older children to school. Around 11 a.m., the housekeeping manager knocked on Sony's door and spoke to her through the window to inform her that they needed to pay the rent or they would have to leave. The manager returned several times that day. On a visit around 2:30 p.m., Lakeith answered the door. The room was dark. Lakeith told the manager that his mother was on her way to pick up the money. On January 27th, Sony did not pick up her older daughter on time. So the school secretary called the child's grandmother, Christine, to ask her to come pick up the girl. When Christine tried to contact Sony, she received no response. At around 6 p.m., she discovered that her other grandchildren were still at daycare. Concerned that she could not reach Sony, Christine asked her husband to pick up the younger children from daycare while she went to the school to find out what was wrong. They contacted the police and reported the incident at approximately 10:30 p.m. Later, on January 28th, the housekeeping manager re-entered room 222 and began taking inventory of the items that Sony and Lakeith had left behind. The room was filled with clothing in a large trash bag, which was then taken to a storage area. After the room was cleaned, it was ready for new guests. On January 29th, James and Rhonda Sargent moved into the room. They quickly noticed a foul odor and attempted to block it with incense, but were unable to eliminate it completely. They also discovered that previous tenants had attempted the same, as they found scented tissues in the tiles and ceiling vents. Because the smell was so strong that they reported it. On January 29th, officers from the Memphis Police Department's Missing Persons Unit visited the hotel to inquire about Sony's whereabouts, as that was where she was last seen. However, they did not enter room 222. Lakeith was arrested on February 2nd, around 7 p.m., while inside Sony's car at a shopping center. He was held for 48 hours on a charge of car theft. During questioning about Sony's disappearance, Lakeith said he last saw her on January 26th. He explained they had met in the hotel parking lot that morning after Sony had dropped off her children at school. They went into the room, had sex, and then returned outside. Lakeith then took Sony's car keys and left the hotel. He claimed Sony planned to use her welfare and student loan money to buy a new car, so he wasn't worried about keeping her car. Lakeith also said he had been living in the car since January 26th. However, investigators discovered that Lakeith had actually been staying at a different hotel. Additionally, given the snowy weather during that time, it was unlikely that he had spent the night in the car. On February 3rd, police found a debit card with Sony's name on it and several recent purchase receipts inside the car. That same day, police also searched the clothes stored at the hotel for DNA or other evidence, but found nothing. Due to the lack of evidence linking Lakeith to Sony's disappearance, he was released. Sony's cousin and her mother had to undertake the painful task of going to the hotel where Sony was staying to collect her belongings. At that time, Sony's cousin had a bad feeling but did not find any evidence. On February 4th, the police went to Sony's cousin's house and found a DVD player in Sony's wallet. Sony's cousin said they had received the items from Moody. According to the cousin, Lakeith borrowed the DVD player on January 24th under the pretext of watching a movie and drove a red car that day. When he saw Lakeith again a few days later, the cousin asked why Lakeith did not pick up the children on January 27th. But Lakeith evaded the question. When the cousin asked about Sony's whereabouts, Lakeith left the DVD player and wallet behind and left. Around that time, guests James and Rhonda Sargent requested to be moved out of room 222 because of the persistent odor. Since there were no other rooms available, they moved to another hotel. Later guests in room 222 also complained of a foul odor, despite the room being cleaned several times and the carpets being cleaned in early February. The odor persisted, only easing slightly over several days. On February 4th, homicide detectives arrived at the hotel to investigate. By this time, room 222 had been occupied and cleaned at least 3 times. As a result, the detectives were unable to enter the room to collect evidence. Instead, they asked hotel staff if they had noticed anything unusual. All staff responded that nothing was unusual. Then, on February 7th, James and Rhonda returned to the hotel and changed rooms 3 times. During one of the changes, they spent the night in room 222. While there, they informed management that the room still smelled unpleasant. To address this issue, in March, the hotel performed a more thorough cleaning of room 222. The staff cleaned the carpet, bedding, shower curtains, and window blinds. However, the results were shocking. The odor not only remained but became even more intense. The manager discussed the issue with the security guard. During the conversation, they recalled that the previous tenant, Sony, had disappeared at the end of January. The security guard recalled the events that occurred at that time and suggested that the manager check room 222 for traces of blood or cleaning agents. 10 minutes later, the manager returned and asked the guard to accompany him. What they found was horrifying. The 2 men entered the room where the manager had removed the mattress from one of the beds, leaving only the bed frame. The bottom of the bed frame had a cover. When they lifted the box spring, they discovered a large gap where anything could be hidden from view. Looking through the sturdy edges of the bed frame, they saw the unthinkable, a decomposing body. They called the police, who arrived at the scene shortly after. The bed frame was found to have many marks on it, and there were 2 pieces of broken wood near the headboard. A towel and a cloth bag were found between the legs of the body. The victim was wearing a shirt but nothing below the waist. The forensic team's autopsy determined that the cause of death was strangulation with a coaxial cable. The cable was wrapped around the neck, under one arm, around the chest, and ended behind the back. The medical examiner concluded that it would take at least 2 to 3 minutes of sustained pressure to cause death. In order to find the killer, the police collected items from between the victim's legs for analysis. The victim's shirt had an unidentified fingerprint. In addition, the scarf and the cloth bag did not belong to the victim. DNA samples that matched Sony's genetic profile, as well as that of a woman, were discovered. More remarkably, male DNA was also found on the cable, which led to the hypothesis that Sony had died at the time she was reported missing. The coaxial cable used in the case may have come from a DVD player that Lakeith borrowed from her cousin. Lakeith had been arrested by police for illegal possession of a weapon, and he was also the last person seen with Sony alive, making him a suspect in the case. He was in Sony's car when he was arrested and taken to the Mason detention facility. On March 18th, authorities launched an investigation into why the case unfolded in such a strange way. The chief of police said the victim's family deserved an explanation and acknowledged that the circumstances of the case were unprecedented, making it a shocking case of domestic violence. He also regretted that the room where Sony died had been cleaned and rented out multiple times, making it difficult for police to collect evidence. However, this explanation was met with skepticism. One of the first tenants, Rhonda, said the police should have been allowed into the room when James and Rhonda visited in January and would have found Sony sooner if they had noticed the smell of a decomposing body. Rhonda believes the police were slow in finding Sony. Following the loss, Sony's family held a funeral for her on March 24th. Sony's children were placed in the care of her sister on April 1st. They are currently trying to gain legal custody of the children. Sony's sister said that although the children were the primary victims, everyone in the family's lives was turned upside down by the loss. She pledged to take care of Sony's children, making sure they had enough food, clothes, and toys, and to keep them together as a family. She also said Sony had benefited from a social program, and she would continue to care for the children as her sister had. The card had been loaded with money before Sony went missing because she received an income tax refund. Police tracked the card's activity and found that it was in Lakeith's possession. During the surveillance, they noticed that the card was used on February 1st at a convenience store Sony usually visited to withdraw cash using her electronic welfare transfer card. Notably, this occurred 4 days after Sony went missing. Officers went to the store and requested the owner to show them the footage from their 16 security cameras. Through the footage, they observed that on the morning of February 1st, at 11:38 a.m., a man dressed in yellow conducted a transaction at the store. He used a Sony card to buy a bottle of orange juice, withdrew cash, and purchased a cigar. After making these purchases, he returned to a car driven by someone else. With all the evidence against him, Lakeith's trial began in the first week of February 2014, more than 4 years after the crime. By then, the Budget Lodge Hotel involved in the crime had closed. Lakeith did not admit his guilt. During the trial, the prosecutor portrayed the case as the tragic end of a tumultuous relationship. In contrast, Lakeith's defense attorney argued that there was insufficient evidence to establish his client's guilt. He pointed out that there were no witnesses or physical evidence to prove Lakeith's crime. The attorney also noted that the police found fingerprints on the victim's bed frame, but those fingerprints did not match Lakeith's. This suggests that someone else may have been involved in the crime. Additionally, the attorney argued that there was reason to suspect that the victim had had relationships with several other men over the years. He also emphasized that his client had never been convicted of domestic violence against the victim. Furthermore, he revealed something that the public did not know. Sony moved in with Lakeith again because she had to leave a relative's home due to a rat infestation. On February 6th, video footage showing Lakeith using a Sony prepaid card 4 days after her death was presented to the court. The defense claimed his calm demeanor throughout the transaction demonstrated his innocence, while the prosecution saw it as evidence of a cold and ruthless man with no regard for the crimes he was accused of committing. On February 7, 2014, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. On February 10, he appealed the conviction, arguing that the court had erred in considering his past acts of domestic violence and that the evidence was insufficient. On July 7, 2015, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the convictions, affirming the decision. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Nicole Peets. Nicole Peets was born on February 26, 1973 in King County, Washington. Nicole was the only child in her family and her parents divorced when she was in school. During her high school years, Nicole was an active, sociable, athletic girl who was well-liked by many people. She had many friends and enjoyed field trips to the countryside. After graduating from high school, Nicole studied public relations at Western Washington College. At the same time, Nicole was still actively involved in sports. Nicole took a coaching position at a local sports club. Nicole quickly gained the respect of her colleagues, and Nicole attracted many customers to her classes. After graduating from college, Nicole decided to continue her education to improve her management skills. She found a job at a large mobile communications company. Nicole's personality is friendly, sociable, and willing to help people, but few people know that inside she is suffering from a lot of pain and suffering. Nicole's teenage years were severely affected by alcoholism. The divorce of her parents was a huge shock to her fragile psyche. Her rebellious nature and bad friends influenced her, and she began drinking. All of this led to a serious alcoholism that lasted for many years and completely undermined Nicole's physical and mental health. At that time, Nicole's mother, Gail, worked as a flight attendant and was often away from home because of her busy work. Therefore, Gail did not realize the change in Nicole. Nicole lives with her elderly grandmother, who also did not realize that her granddaughter regularly drank alcohol. When the truth was revealed, alcoholism had caused severe damage to Nicole. To help Nicole, Gail, her mother, accompanied Nicole to support her. Gail accompanied Nicole to therapy and alcoholism meetings, helping Nicole open up and overcome her cravings. At that time, Nicole's mother Gail had remarried, and Gail's new husband, Robert, was supportive of his stepdaughter, loving Nicole like his own daughter and believing that Nicole could overcome her alcoholism. Nicole took treatment very seriously. She did not miss a single meeting and quickly overcame her addiction. However, alcohol caused many health problems for Nicole. She had serious problems with her pancreas that required surgery. In addition, her alcoholism at a young age had seriously affected her fertility, making it impossible for Nicole to have children. In the mid-1990s, when Nicole was recovering from her addiction and living sober again, Nicole met David. At the time, Nicole had just gotten a job at a sports club, and David was a regular at the club. David was a tall, handsome young man. David was immediately attracted to Nicole, an attractive trainer, and David began to show interest in her. David, who was 4 years younger than Nicole, soon developed a relationship that lasted almost 8 years, and it was not until 2002 that the couple decided to marry. David and Nicole had a simple wedding in Hawaii, inviting only their closest friends. After their marriage, the newlyweds bought their own house and began to settle down in the town of Linwood, Washington. Nicole was a friendly and outgoing young woman who quickly made friends and built good relationships with her neighbors. Nicole loved animals and had several dogs. Because she could not have children, Nicole devoted all her love to these pets. David and Nicole were a perfect couple. They often went for walks with their dogs and always had happy smiles on their faces. Nicole loved to cook, and she was a very good cook. Nicole often treated her husband to delicious meals cooked by herself. In 2006, just a few days before her 33rd birthday, Nicole mysteriously disappeared. That day, for the first time, she did not attend an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, where she was the leader and inspiration for the group. Nicole also did not come to work, making her colleagues even more worried. In the evening, her mother, Gail, felt very worried when she could not contact Nicole all day, which had never happened before. Gail called Nicole's husband, David, to find out what was going on. However, David could not contact Nicole either. David said that David and Nicole had argued a little the day before, so when he tried calling Nicole the next day and got no response, he thought that Nicole was still angry with him. David did not rush to find Nicole right away, but waited until the evening to ask for her forgiveness. However, Nicole still did not come home that night. Nicole's family tried to contact her by phone but received no response. They decided to go to the police to report the incident. However, the police did not immediately accept their report because Nicole was an adult and had only been missing for less than a day. It was not until the evening of the second day after Nicole went missing that the police began searching. When Nicole did not appear and her phone was unreachable, the police decided to start searching from where she was last seen, which was her and David's house. However, after investigating, the police did not find any clues or unusual signs that Nicole had been kidnapped or that something had happened to her in that house. And Nicole's car was also missing with her, suggesting that she may have left on her own and did not want to return. Her mother Gail and stepfather Robert did not wait for the police to wait the required time and began the search themselves. They appealed to all concerned through social media to help in the search and share any relevant information about Nicole's location. Nicole's father and mother also took the first flight to Linwood, where they began searching for Nicole themselves, handing out flyers with her photo and asking people who knew her. The police searched for Nicole and her car. They tried to determine the route the car had taken on the day Nicole went missing. But there were no clues. The next morning, a man was jogging when he took a shortcut through an area that was very sparsely populated. As he passed through that area, he noticed something strange in the bushes. As he got closer, he realized it was the severely mutilated body of a naked woman. He immediately called the police and reported the incident. The police quickly arrived at the scene. At the scene was the body of a young woman without any clothes on. Based on the number of bruises and scratches, the victim had been brutally beaten. The cause of death was asphyxiation due to strangulation with bare hands. The police suspected that the body was Nicole Peets, who had been missing for several days. When Nicole's mother, Gail, went to the morgue to identify the body, Gail fainted when she saw the body, and her husband, Robert, was also very sad. As for Nicole's husband, David, he did not show any signs of grief. This made everyone around David feel a little suspicious of his reaction. The police continued to search for Nicole's car, hoping to find traces of the killer in the car. Information about the missing car was widely publicized in the media, along with a call for people to contact the police if they saw the car. Some time later, a gray Volkswagen Polo was found in a parking lot on the outskirts of town. The security guard there discovered the car when he realized that it had been left there for a long time. At the time, he did not know that the car was involved in this serious murder. The police took the car for inspection and examined it to look for evidence and clues to help track down the criminal. However, after the inspection, they found no traces, except for the fingerprints and DNA traces of Nicole and her husband David. Without finding any concrete evidence, the police returned the car to David. The truth is that Nicole was brutally murdered, but the motive for the crime remains unclear. In addition, the carjacking theory is unlikely, as the car was abandoned shortly after on the other side of town. Nicole Peets' case remains unsolved after nearly a year of investigation. There have been no new leads or leads in the search for the perpetrator. No one saw the suspect leave his car in the parking lot because it was not crowded and there were no surveillance cameras in the area. What is suspicious is that Nicole's case has been kept secret. Information about the investigation and new evidence has not been disclosed to the family. Nicole's relatives have not been fully updated, only receiving small details. Nicole's bank card was used at a gas station after she went missing. Although the police have collected images from the cameras, they have not yet disclosed the results of the investigation. When Nicole's case did not progress and the perpetrator was still at large, Nicole's parents decided to conduct an investigation themselves. They hired a private investigator to gather information, verify some suspicions, and offer a reward for anyone who could provide useful information. The reward was initially $10,000 and later increased to $35,000, but no new leads were found. David initially showed great interest in investigating Nicole's disappearance for the first 6 months. However, after that time, he began to distance himself and had little contact with his in-laws, and David eventually remarried and had children of his own. The news of David's remarriage and children of his own came as a huge shock to Nicole's mother, Gail, because Nicole was unable to have children and was often blamed by David. A grief-stricken Gail repeatedly hinted that the culprit might be her son-in-law. 6 years later, Nicole's case took an unexpected turn. David was arrested as the prime suspect in the case. David did not expect that he himself would be the focus of this investigation. Previously, David had changed his residence and lost contact with Nicole's family, so he thought that the case was over and no one was looking for him. However, David was very surprised when the police raided and arrested him. At that time, David even declared his innocence and was willing to take a lie detector test, but he failed the test. As for the police, They suspected David from the beginning, but lacked concrete evidence. In order to arrest David, the police gathered a lot of evidence to ensure that he was responsible for the crime. In fact, David himself probably thought that he had committed the crime perfectly and would never be discovered. A video from the gas station provided an important clue. Footage of the moment a man paid with Nicole's card showed that the man looked similar to David. Although the man was wearing a hat and sunglasses, making identification more difficult, the footage was a key clue in the case. Police also discovered that Nicole was not wearing her wedding ring. Nicole never left the house without it. Initially, police thought the ring had been stolen with other items, but the box containing the ring was later found on a dressing table in Nicole's home. Police discovered a mouth guard in Nicole's mouth during the autopsy. This was a device Nicole had been prescribed shortly before the tragedy, as she suffered from uncontrollable spasms of her chewing muscles due to anxiety, which led to worn enamel and chipped teeth. The presence of this device suggested that Nicole may have been murdered while she was still asleep in her bed. It is possible that David had forgotten that his wife was using a mouth guard because she had only recently started using it. In addition, the police examined the traces left in Nicole's car. Only David's and Nicole's fingerprints were found in the car. No traces of anyone else were found, suggesting that there was no third person involved in the murder. The investigation also shed light on Nicole and David's family situation at the time. David did not hold any permanent jobs and preferred to spend his time in bars and clubs, where David spent all of Nicole's earnings on alcohol and other women. The family was facing serious financial problems, and the situation became worse over time. Nicole tried to convince David to change his lifestyle and attend alcohol rehabilitation meetings to help David get back on track. However, David's response was indifferent and insulting. David had affairs with many women. Nicole's mother Gail knew about the serious problems in Nicole's family and tried to convince Nicole to leave David. However, Nicole did not want to do so because she loved David and hoped he would change. After Nicole's death, her husband David quickly received a large insurance payout and started a new relationship. Before that, David had been having an affair with a girl named Jane for several months. David often spent time with her at bars and clubs when Nicole was busy working or studying. Before Nicole's birthday, David brought his mistress home, where they were caught by Nicole. This incident became the cause of an argument in the family. Nicole told her mother about the incident, and a few days later, she mysteriously disappeared. Because Gail knew everything, she suspected David from the beginning. However, the police said that the evidence collected was too little to arrest the suspect. The case was kept secret and the family was never heard from again. When David received a large insurance payout after Nicole's death, he spent the money with his mistress, Jane. David appeared in court in September 2013 for his crimes. David received the maximum sentence possible under the laws of the state where the case was tried. David served 18 years in prison. However, in 2025, he could be eligible for parole after serving 2/3 of his sentence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Carmen Thomas. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987, in South Africa. Her life took a drastic turn when her father passed away when she was just 10 years old. Overwhelmed by grief, her family moved to live with relatives in Whitby, United Kingdom. However, the move did not bring the peace they had hoped for, and they eventually returned to South Africa. When Carmen turned 18, she decided to leave behind with her relatives and later relocated to London to pursue her education. She earned a master's degree in marketing and quickly became known for her charismatic and outgoing personality. Carmen formed strong bonds with many people and became a loyal friend and companion. However, living in a big city like London came with its expenses, and Carmen had to work hard to maintain a decent standard of living. By day, she worked as a marketer in a store, and by night, she worked part-time at a gentleman's club. Although her career choices may have raised eyebrows, Carmen was a woman of principle and never compromised her values. She conducted herself with dignity and earned the respect of her clients. It was during her time at the club that she met Brad Callahan, a charming and flamboyant man. Brad was born in April 1978 in New Zealand to parents who separated when he was just 9 years old. He stayed with his mother and later moved to Australia. Brad graduated from university in 2001 with a degree in construction engineering. He was then offered a job as a chief structural engineer for a large business complex in the UK by a prominent construction company. To navigate the complex's high-stakes negotiations and enhance his professional status, Brad sought the services of a gentleman's agency, where he met Carmen. She was intelligent, tall, and beautiful, with striking dark eyes and black hair. However, Brad's demanding career and ambitious nature left him little time for a serious relationship. Despite this, Brad and Carmen got along well after a dinner, and their casual interactions eventually blossomed into a solid friendship. Over time, their friendship deepened into a romance, and they began living together. Their relationship was built on mutual trust, care, and support. When Carmen got pregnant, Brad decided it would be better to go back to New Zealand, a country with cleaner air and a more laid-back lifestyle. In March 2005, they returned to Auckland. After the birth of their son Jack, they experienced immense happiness. They prioritized Jack's safety and well-being, making sure he had everything he needed for a happy childhood. However, the arrival of their son brought significant challenges to their relationship. The first problems arose in the relationship between Carmen and Brad due to disagreements on how to raise their child, causing tension and instability. After 3 years, they decided to go their separate ways, but shared joint custody of their son, Jack. The breakup was challenging for both, but they made a genuine effort to maintain a positive relationship for Jack's sake. Carmen and Jack eventually moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Oakland. With time, Carmen regained her emotional balance and started a new life without Brad. In 2008, she and her son relocated to a house on a street near Brad's, so Jack could be close to his father. Having lost her own father at a young age, Carmen wanted to ensure Jack always had a father figure in his life. Despite her decision to live near Brad, Carmen's friends and family believed she and Brad still had a good friendship, but in reality, they only spent time together when it was related to Jack. As time passed, life continued for Carmen. After parting ways, Carmen and Brad each attempted to move on. Brad resumed his career as a construction engineer and, in May 2009, began a new relationship, which ultimately led to an engagement. Meanwhile, Carmen devoted herself to raising their son and, much to Brad's dismay, returned to her work at a gentleman's club. This choice troubled Brad. Carmen repeatedly presented Brad with ultimatums, but he dismissed her requests, focusing on his impending marriage and plans for fatherhood once again. This marked the beginning of adjustments to his financial commitments, specifically affecting the alimony payments for the maintenance of their son, Jack, which Brad made in accordance with their agreement. However, Carmen viewed the financial constraints as a catalyst in an escalating series of conflicts. Tensions escalated until March 19, 2010, when a domestic violence incident occurred. Police responded to a neighbor's call about a dispute and mediated the situation. As a result, Carmen received a formal warning from law enforcement. On June 29, 2010, Brad visited Carmen's house to discuss a new school for Jack and to sign a written agreement for child support. However, Carmen was unhappy with the document and asked Brad to leave, yelling that Jack was not his son as he departed. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to contact Carmen again, but she did not respond. On July 13, 2010, Brad reported Carmen missing to the police, who began searching for her. Through video footage and interviews with neighbors, investigators were able to reconstruct a timeline of events leading up to Carmen's disappearance. They discovered that on June 29th, a surveillance camera at a nearby supermarket had captured footage of Carmen, providing a potential lead in the search. During their investigation of the rented house where Carmen and Jack lived, police noticed that there was no outdoor garbage can. Inside the house, they found bloodstains on the front door, washing machine, sink, and shower. To confirm the presence of blood, forensic scientists used luminol, a substance that reacts with the iron in hemoglobin. The test revealed multiple patterns of blood on the bathroom door and floor. The landlord reported that on June 29th, she heard loud screaming, followed by prolonged crying and moaning. When she knocked on Carmen's door, no one answered. She looked out the window and saw a street trash can and an overturned drying rack, which caught her attention. She called her husband, but before he arrived, Brad walked out of the house, carrying soiled clothes. He told the landlord that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlord noticed that Brad appeared to have just taken a shower. She had no reason to doubt his story, so she didn't call the police. The search for Carmen continued, and her cell phone activity caught the police's attention. Although messages were being sent from her phone regularly, the tone and language used were unusual and didn't match her previous communication style. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found, and in the back seat, they discovered her luggage, clothes, and other personal belongings. The police investigation into Carmen's disappearance began with the examination of her seized suitcase, which revealed traces of blood and a note indicating she owed money to her employer. An envelope with Misty's name and $270 was also found in the glove compartment. Inspector Mark Benefield suspected foul play after finding blood in the car and launched a search for Carmen's body in the countryside southeast of Auckland, but it was inconclusive. As the investigation continued, police analyzed Carmen's and Brad's phones, discovering they had been in close proximity to each other during the search. However, Carmen's phone was not connected to a cell tower in Hamilton. A crucial piece of evidence was a missing trash can, which had disappeared from its usual spot near the house on the day Carmen vanished. A neighbor reported seeing the can being taken away through her window. Police suspected the trash can might have been used to dispose of evidence. When EE examined Brad's phone records and bank card details, then they found that on June 30th, Brad had purchased a meat cleaver, a large plastic container, and several garbage bags, which raised suspicions. By studying Brad's daily routine, police identified some unusual events, including a day when he arrived early at the construction site and walked alone around the property for an extended period. While it was not unusual for a supervisor to be on site early, the police found it noteworthy. After gathering evidence, including Carmen's cell phone and suspicious purchases, they began to suspect Brad of murder. They believed Brad had killed his former lover, Carmen Thomas, by hitting her multiple times in the head and then carefully hiding her body. On September 21st, Brad was arrested and charged with Carmen's murder and attempting to obstruct justice. Brad's second son was born while he was in custody, causing him to become emotional and resentful. 9 days after his arrest, Brad broke down and revealed to investigators the location of Carmen's body. It turned out that Brad had attempted to create an alibi by making it seem like Carmen had left for Hamilton and never returned. However, under questioning, he eventually detailed the events of the day Carmen was killed, revealing that his plan had not been as perfect as he thought. Brad admitted that Carmen and Brad had a heated argument, which ended with Carmen telling Brad that Jack was not his son. In a fit of rage, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house. However, he returned 5 minutes later, grabbed a baseball bat, and brutally attacked Carmen, striking her in the head with such force that she fell unconscious, bleeding profusely. Despite realizing the gravity of his actions, Brad continued to assault Carmen, throwing several punches. Memories of happier times flashed before his eyes, but his anger and resentment consumed him. Brad knew his life would never be the same after this moment, and he could never undo the damage. Nevertheless, he felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, believing that he had solved his problem and ensured that Jack was now his alone. Brad regained his composure, took a shower, and quietly left Carmen's house. In the following days, he devised a plan to dispose of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. He met his friend outside a supermarket and asked him to buy black garbage bags, kerosene, and cleaning products, hoping to avoid raising suspicion. Brad then returned to the apartment, meticulously cleaned up the bloodstains, wrapped Carmen's body in a bag, and disposed of it in a trash can. After killing Carmen, Brad dismembered her body into 8 pieces to make it easier to dispose of. He cut off her legs at the hip joints and then cut each leg in half at the knee. He also severed her arms and head from her torso. A few days later, on July 3rd, Brad met a friend at a boat ramp in Oahu Bay, near downtown Oakland. He confessed to his friend that he had killed Carmen during an argument and asked for help disposing of her body. However, his friend refused to provide a boat to dump the remains into the sea. Over the next few days, Brad drove to Ware Ridge in West Auckland and buried the dismembered body parts in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He left a suitcase of clothes and some of her personal belongings in the car to make it seem like she had left voluntarily. However, he made a critical mistake by including bloody clothes in the suitcase. In an attempt to cover his tracks, Brad started sending text messages from Carmen's cell phone to her friends, pretending to be her. He claimed that she was not feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. However, this plan ultimately backfired on him. On October 1st, police excavated the burial site indicated by Brad and found the body of Carmen Thomas. Her remains were discovered in plastic containers, carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Wayfair Ridge. An autopsy revealed that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family on October 13th. Tragically, her young son Jack, who had been waiting and hoping to see his mother again, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, Brad Callahan's first court hearing was held. Judge Winning determined that the crime was unintentional and took into account Brad's claim that he acted impulsively in a state of rage. However, the judge was more severe in his assessment of the subsequent cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A retrial was held on November 25, 2011, where police officers filled the High Court in Auckland. In a surprise move, Brad Callahan made 2 guilty pleas, admitting to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. A judge has sentenced 31-year-old Brad Callahan to life in prison for murdering Carmen Thomas. Brad was also given a 6-year sentence for attempting to interfere with the investigation into Thomas's death. The judge considered this one of the most serious cases of attempted interference with justice, describing Brad's actions as extremely serious. During the trial at Auckland High Court, the judge criticized the brutality of Thomas's murder, but decided not to impose the harshest possible sentence. The courtroom was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents who had traveled from South Africa. Judge Venin condemned Brad's attempts to cover up his crime, which involved considerable effort and deception. The 6-year sentence for interfering with the investigation will be served at the same time as the life sentence. In a statement, the Thomas family expressed their ongoing anger and grief, saying that no punishment can bring their daughter back. However, they are relieved that Brad will be in prison for a long time, giving him the opportunity to reflect on the harm he has caused. Little boy Jack Brad is living with his grandmother in another town under an assumed name. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Brianna Marie Schneller. Brianna Marie Schneller was an 18-year-old with a vibrant personality who loved Mexican food, music, dancing, and roller coasters. She was an exceptional student, and ranking as the top student at Everest High School in Washington, according to her parents, Craig and Lori Schneller. Brianna had a promising future ahead, with a trip to Tennessee planned for the summer and a notable achievement as the only student in Wisconsin to qualify for a national competition in professional and technical fields. Brianna's passion was to pursue a career in restaurant management and eventually start her own business in the food service industry. To gain experience and skills, she worked part-time at El Mezcal restaurant in Rib Mountain. Those who knew her, including friends, colleagues, and customers, described her as kind and responsive. Brianna's life was on the verge of two major events: her graduation and her wedding to her 22-year-old fiancé, Sebastian Ramirez. Brianna's parents initially disapproved of her relationship with Sebastian due to their age difference and concerns that she was growing up too quickly. However, after getting to know Sebastian better, they began to trust him and saw that he genuinely loved Brianna and had serious plans for their future together. They eventually moved in together, sharing an apartment on 12th Avenue in Wow with Sebastian's 19-year-old younger brother, Hugo. To outsiders, it seemed like the three of them got along well and lived harmoniously, burning the envy of many for their close friendship. Sebastian and Hugo supported Brianna's interests and also worked with her at a local restaurant called El Tequila Salsa. It's likely that this is where Sebastian and Brianna first met. Despite their seemingly perfect life, tragedy struck on May 2, 2009. The day began like any other, with Sebastian waking up early and trying not to disturb Brianna, who was still sleeping peacefully beside him. It was a day off from school, and she had no reason to wake up early. Brianna woke up while her boyfriend was in the shower. They exchanged affectionate greetings and discussed their plans for the day. Meanwhile, Sebastian tried to rouse Hugo, who had returned home early that morning after a late-night party. Hugo was clearly hungover. After Sebastian left for work, which was just a short walk away, his younger brother followed suit. Brianna was left alone in the apartment. Later, Hugo was feeling unwell. His hangover was severe, and he was struggling to concentrate. He decided to take an early lunch break and headed home to rest. When he arrived at the apartment, everything seemed normal at first. However, as he entered his brother's room, he noticed that it was in disarray. Brianna was lying on the floor, unresponsive. Hugo rushed to her side and asked what was wrong, but she didn't answer. At first, he didn't notice the blood. Hugo discovered a horrific scene when he removed a towel covering a woman's face. Her severe injuries had left Hugo almost unrecognizable, and he was utterly shocked and overcome with grief at the sight of her. Despite his distress, he knew he had to act quickly and ran to his neighbor's apartment on the floor below for help. The neighbor, a woman, called emergency services at 1:30 p.m., who was too distraught to speak clearly. The emergency operator received the call and was told that she was the girlfriend of Sebastian. She was lying on the floor, severely injured with cuts all over her body and a badly disfigured face. The operator was informed that she showed no signs of life. Police and paramedics rushed to the apartment building after receiving a call. When they arrived, they found a crowded parking lot, but one person stood out, Hugo Ramirez. He approached the officers and led them to the apartment where the incident occurred. Inside, they found a disturbing scene. Brianna's body was severely injured, with deep stab wounds on her chest, neck, and wrist. Hugo was visibly shaken and could barely speak as he led officers to the apartment. He simply pointed to Brianna's body, and the officers took note of the scene. The officers asked Hugo to leave the room so that forensic specialists could begin their examination. The specialists observed that the blood on the floor had already started to dry, suggesting that Brianna's body had been there for some time. It was clear that she had tried to defend herself, as evidenced by the defensive cuts on her arms. However, the attacker had overpowered her, leaving behind a crime scene with a significant amount of evidence. The forensic team found several key pieces of evidence, including a bloody iron on the floor, which appeared to have been used to strike Brianna's face. The iron was broken, with pieces scattered nearby. 2 knives were found in the bathroom sink, one of which was missing its sharp tip. Blood was also found on the soap, suggesting that the attacker had washed their hands after the crime. However, the most notable piece of evidence was a bloodied shoe print on the carpet, which drew the investigators' attention. The investigation of the house uncovered many new details. Notably, there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the victim may have known her attacker or that the perpetrator had a way to enter the apartment without breaking in. Additionally, a large sum of money was found scattered throughout the apartment, consisting of bills ranging from $1 to $20. According to Hugo, this money was comprised of tips they had accumulated at work, which were carelessly left lying around. At first glance, it appeared that nothing was missing from the apartment, indicating that the attack was not motivated by robbery. This theory was further supported by the discovery of a broken knife tip in the victim's body. The fact that the knife broke during the attack indicates that the perpetrator applied considerable force. It's crucial to grasp what may have motivated someone to hold such intense feelings of anger and aggression against Chi. Uncovering the cause of this brutal and unprecedented attack is crucial in shedding light on the matter. Craig and Laura Schneller anxiously waited at the police station, having heard that something terrible had happened at their daughter's home. Unfortunately, they had been unable to contact Brianna, and their hearts were heavy with worry. The officers had to tell the parents Brianna that their worst fears had come true. The news was devastating. Their daughter, Brianna, had passed away. The loss of a child is one of the greatest sorrows a parent can experience, and for the Schnellers, it was a life-altering moment. To confirm the identity, the authorities showed them photographs of Brianna, but only those that clearly showed her face, as some of the other images were too graphic. After confirming the tragic news, the Schnellers were in shock. With the help of a psychologist, they were able to compose themselves and answer questions from the police. They were eager to assist in the investigation and help catch the person responsible. The Schnellers provided as much information as they could about their daughter's life, but they insisted that she had no known enemies. They also revealed that Brianna's mother had been the last person she had spoken to that morning. Her mother, Craig, took Brianna's car to the repair shop and messaged her daughter around 10 a.m. to let her know. Brianna replied to the message. The investigation shows that the tragedy occurred at a point in time that was after they sent messages to each other and before Hugo's arrival. As part of their inquiry, detectives first interviewed the Ramirez brothers, Sebastian and Hugo, questioning them separately. Sebastian, Brianna's fiancé, stated that he woke up at 9:15 a.m., had a brief conversation with Brianna while getting ready for work, and then woke up his brother, Hugo, around 10:15 a.m. Sebastian claimed he was already at the restaurant when he received a phone call informing him about the incident. Hugo's account corroborated Sebastian's, saying he left the house around 10:15 a.m., shortly after his brother. He returned home at 1:20 p.m. due to feeling unwell and wanting to rest. When Hugo found Brianna's body, his reported illness and fatigue vanished almost instantly. The events that followed were a daze. He was so shocked that he couldn't think clearly about how to respond. His mind went blank, and his hands shook uncontrollably, prompting him to seek help from a neighbor. The Ramirez brothers' accounts were believable, and their distress seemed authentic. Nevertheless, the police had seen convincing performances before, so they needed concrete evidence to confirm their innocence. It was possible that one of the brothers was involved in the crime and the other was covering for him. To investigate this, detectives asked about their relationships with each other. Sebastian expressed his love for Brianna and his excitement for their upcoming wedding. Hugo was questioned about whether he had any issues with Brianna or if they had argued, but he denied it. Hugo also explained that while he found her attractive and charming, he had no romantic intentions towards her because he valued his good relationship with his brother and would never jeopardize his happiness. Brianna was like a sister to Hugo. And after hours of questioning, neither Hugo nor Sebastian raised any suspicions. The police took DNA samples from the brothers and allowed them to return home. To verify the brothers' alibis, detectives spoke with employees of El Tequila Salsa restaurant and reviewed the restaurant's security footage. The brothers' accounts checked out, and the possibility of a domestic-related crime was ruled out. The investigation continued, and the question remained, who could have committed such a heinous crime against an innocent young woman? Was there a predator lurking in the city who had been watching Brianna and waiting for the perfect moment to strike? The police considered this possibility as they analyzed the evidence. The autopsy results confirmed the police's initial suspicions. The sequence of events was reconstructed as follows. Brianna was first hit on the head with a blunt object, likely an iron, which caused a severe injury. The perpetrator then cut her throat and inflicted multiple stab wounds to her body. The attack was extremely violent, with so many wounds that even experts couldn't count them all. At least 2 of the injuries were fatal. DNA from an unknown source was found under Brianna's fingernails, indicating that she struggled and resisted her attacker. Initial reports that nothing was missing from Brianna's home were later found to be incorrect. Brianna's phone had actually been taken, and Sebastian was the one who discovered its loss and informed the detectives. This new information became a crucial lead in the investigation. The police learned from the phone provider that the phone was still active and obtained its location. Surprisingly, the phone was found to be nearby, specifically on the premises of the restaurant where Sebastian and Hugo worked. This revelation added complexity to the case, given the brothers' solid alibi and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the missing phone. The detectives rushed to the location and found that the phone's coordinates led them to the parking lot of a shopping center that housed the restaurant. A search of the area revealed that the phone was likely in one of the trash bins. After a brief search, a plastic takeout bag with the logo of El Tequila Salsa was found in a container. Inside the bag were the victim's phone, 2 mismatched gloves, and a pair of women's underwear. One of the gloves had a bloodstain. The bag and its contents were sent to the lab for further analysis, which could potentially yield fingerprints or DNA from the perpetrator. After seeing a photo of the bag's contents, Sebastian identified his girlfriend's underwear. The police then questioned the restaurant staff multiple times. On May 5th, they asked everyone to provide a DNA sample and checked for any scratches or injuries. They also carefully reviewed all the surveillance footage, both inside and outside the building and nearby businesses. The police had a challenging task to figure out who had thrown away the bag. A kitchen worker initially caught the investigators' attention because he arrived late to work after Brianna had already been found lifeless. However, he had a solid alibi. He had been pulled over for speeding on his way to the restaurant. Reviewing the security footage was crucial to the investigation, which led them to another suspect, Raul Ponce Rocha, the 24-year-old kitchen manager. On the day of the crime, Raul left the building at 10:18 a.m. wearing a brown hoodie and returned 35 minutes later, at 10:53 a.m., without it. When questioned, Raul explained that he had gone to pick up his friend Luciano, a dishwasher at the restaurant, who lived in the same building as Brianna and her colleagues. Raul claimed the trip took about 20 minutes, but there was a 15-minute gap in his timeline that he refused to explain. Luciano corroborated Raul's story, stating they drove straight to work without stopping. Nevertheless, the detectives remained skeptical about the unaccounted 15 minutes and Raul's suspicious behavior. Raul Ponce Rocha, the manager of El Tequila Salsa, had raised suspicions due to the cuts on his hands, which he claimed were from working with knives. However, there was not enough evidence to detain him at that point. Further investigation revealed that on May 2nd at 1:16 p.m., a single employee had exited the back door of the restaurant, and at the same time, only one person had approached the trash bins. This led to the quick identification of the suspect, who was surprisingly Raul Ponce Rocha, not Sebastian or Hugo Ramirez as initially suspected. A search warrant was obtained for Raul's home, and the search uncovered some peculiar items. Under his mattress, investigators found 4 pairs of women's underwear, several adult videos, a brown hoodie, and a glove similar to the one found in the trash bin. On the same day, Raul's DNA samples were sent for comparison with those found on the plastic bag, and a strand of female hair found on his clothing was also analyzed. All the evidence pointed to Brianna. It was only a matter of time before the test results confirmed the match. Raul was eventually arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder. Sebastian was stunned when he learned that a suspect had been identified in the brutal crime. He had trouble believing that his co-worker, Raul Ponce Rocha, could be capable of such a heinous act. What motivated Raul to commit this crime, especially since he barely knew Brianna? Sebastian's impression of Raul was that he was a friendly and harmless person. The mystery began to unravel in 2011 when Raul stood trial. Despite a lengthy investigation, Raul consistently denied any involvement in the crime and never admitted guilt. However, the prosecution presented strong evidence that contradicted his claims. Raul's DNA was found on several key pieces of evidence, including the iron, knives, a plastic bag, and its contents, as well as under Brianna's fingernails. A shoe print at the crime scene also matched Raul's shoes. The evidence pieced together the events of May 2, 2009. On his way to work that day, Raul passed by Brianna's house, a place that had long fascinated him. Assuming she was out, since her car was not in the driveway, he took advantage of the opportunity to break into her apartment and take what he wanted. Raul had a disturbing habit of collecting women's underwear, with evidence found hidden under his mattress. On the day of the incident, Raul left work, supposedly to pick up his friend Luciano, but instead entered Brianna's apartment without warning. He easily gained entry, suggesting he may have had a key, and went directly to Brianna's room, where he began rummaging through her belongings. When Brianna confronted him, Raul was likely caught off guard and feared being recognized. Panicked, he grabbed the nearest object, an iron, and used it to strike her. He then escalated the violence by slashing her throat with a knife and inflicting multiple other injuries. The investigation found that the killer appeared to take pleasure in the brutal act, as evidenced by the numerous and excessive wounds inflicted on the victim. The attacker also used multiple knives during the assault. After committing the crime, Raul attempted to cover his tracks by washing his hands and removing his jacket, which was likely stained with blood. He then calmly returned to work, pretending nothing had happened, and drove Luciano to the restaurant as planned. Raul took advantage of the lunch break to dispose of the evidence bag in a trash bin, which was captured on the kitchen's video recordings. Before the trial, Raul admitted to meeting with Brianna but claimed he didn't kill her. However, he suspected someone else might have and named a former restaurant employee. Raul stated that he saw this acquaintance, Sergio, at Brianna's house on the day she died. This confirmed that Raul had indeed entered the Ramirez apartment. However, when Raul left, Sergio stayed behind and had an argument with Brianna. Raul's statement raised more questions and led to further investigations. The authorities verified the information and managed to contact Sergio, who was abroad at the time. Sergio appeared at the trial and testified that he was not involved in Brianna's death. He proved that he was not in the country on the day of the crime, as he had left weeks earlier to care for his ill father in Mexico. It became clear that Raul had hoped to falsely accuse Sergio and create doubt among the jurors. However, his plan failed, and Raul's actions showed that he had no qualms about accusing an innocent person of a heinous crime, and he felt no remorse for his actions. The trial of Raul Ponce Rocha drew a large crowd, including Brianna's family members and her friends Sebastian and Hugo. The young men struggled to keep their emotions in check, prompting officers to intervene multiple times to restore calm. In the end, Raul was found guilty of murdering Brianna Schneller and burglary, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently serving his sentence at a correctional facility in Wisconsin. After the verdict, Brianna's father expressed his gratitude that justice had been served. He shared that he still keeps a Father's Day card Brianna gave him and cherishes every memory of her. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Lindsay Cutshall. Lindsay Cutshall was born in 1982 in the small town of White Eyes, Ohio, to a devoutly Christian family. Her father was a pastor, and she was raised with strong religious values. Despite her strict upbringing, Lindsay was an adventurous and active child who enjoyed sports and later developed a passion for hiking and extreme tourism. After completing her education, Lindsay attended Appalachian Bible College in West Virginia, where she honed her outdoor skills. She regularly went on hikes, climbed mountains, and rafted down rivers, often organizing her own expeditions. Lindsay's dream was to establish a summer camp for children and teenagers, where she could teach them wilderness survival skills, rafting, and other outdoor activities. Jason Allen was born in 1978 in Zeeland, Michigan, to a deeply religious family. As a teenager, he became fascinated with hiking and wilderness survival. Jason was a tall, athletic, and charismatic individual who possessed natural leadership qualities, which drew like-minded people to him. He was passionate about exploring new heights and mastering outdoor skills. Lindsay and Jason met in 2002 during a hiking trip in the Appalachian Mountains. At the time, Lindsay was still a student, while Jason worked as a mountain guide and climbing instructor. They quickly formed a connection after meeting for the first time, leading the young man to ask for her hand in marriage just 6 months later. Both sets of parents gave their approval, and the young man proposed to his girlfriend with a beautiful diamond ring. Shortly after, he gave her a second engagement ring. As a couple, they made ambitious plans for their future. They intended to get married in September 2004 and buy a spacious house to raise a family. But things didn't turn out as expected. Before their wedding, they worked as senior counselors at a Christian summer camp called Rock and Water in California's El Dorado County. Their goal was to gain experience and eventually open their own camp after the wedding. On the Friday evening of August 14th, Lindsay and Jason decided to take a weekend trip to the San Francisco area. Before leaving, they informed their colleagues of their plans and left 2 experienced counselors in charge of the camp, ensuring a smooth transition. They told everyone they would return by Monday, expecting no issues for either themselves or their temporary replacements. With their plan in place, they set off in Lindsay's 1992 red Ford Tempo, and unfortunately, this was the last time anyone saw them alive. By Sunday evening, Jason and Lindsay, both counselors, had not returned to camp, but their absence did not raise immediate concern. It was assumed they would arrive late that night or early Monday. However, when they failed to appear at the Monday morning roll call at 8 a.m. and their phones were unreachable, their colleagues grew worried. The group quickly notified the police and then reached out to Jason and Lindsay's families to inform them about the situation. The parents went to the camp right away to get more information about the incident. Their colleagues were particularly concerned because Jason and Lindsay were known for their reliability and punctuality. If they had encountered any issues, they would have likely found a way to communicate. Upon arriving at the camp, law enforcement officials began questioning their colleagues, but the investigation quickly hit a roadblock. No one knew exactly where Jason and Lindsay had gone. They had planned to explore the San Francisco area, but their love for adventure and extreme activities made it likely that they were in a remote location with no access to communication or civilization. The police decided to wait for 48 hours, allowing the missing couple a window to possibly return home by themselves. In the meantime, concerned relatives and friends didn't want to delay any longer, and therefore decided to start searching. They reached out to everyone in their network, trying to gather information about the last time someone had contact with they. A missing person flyer featuring a photo of they was circulated, asking witnesses to report any potential sightings right away. By Tuesday, law enforcement had joined the search. The main focus was on the San Francisco area, its surrounding suburbs, and nearby localities. However, the large terrain made it challenging to thoroughly search every inch. A friend's insight that they frequently visited the secluded and picturesque rocky beaches led the police to concentrate on these locations. As the search effort dragged on for days, with several bodies found in sleeping bags in the targeted areas, the likelihood of finding they alive decreased significantly. On Wednesday, August 19th, a helicopter patrol spotted 2 bodies in sleeping bags on a remote rocky beach, indicating that the individuals were likely deceased rather than just resting. Upon arriving at the scene, police found a red Ford Tempo parked near a tourist shelter and a steep trail leading to a scenic beach. The car was identified as belonging to missing student Lindsay Cutshall after a database check. As officers descended the trail, they discovered 2 people in sleeping bags, who initially appeared to be sleeping. However, they did not respond to calls or noise. Closer inspection revealed that the individuals, a young man and woman, were deceased, with no signs of life. Preliminary examination suggested that they had been killed by gunshot wounds to the head, and the smell of decomposition indicated they had been there for over a day. All of their belongings, including phones, wallets, bank cards, and cash, were found next to them, ruling out robbery as a motive. The car keys were also visible, eliminating car theft as a motive. Investigators initially believed the deceased were the young couple who had gone missing near San Francisco the previous week. Documents found at the scene confirmed the identities of the victims as Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen. However, formal identification by their relatives was still necessary. When the parents arrived, they were overcome with grief upon recognizing the bodies of their children. The investigation led police to rule out initial theories of robbery or carjacking due to the presence of untouched valuables, money, and keys at the scene. Forensic analysis also showed no signs of physical or intimate assault on the bodies, except for the fatal gunshot wounds to the head. It appeared that Lindsay and Jason were peacefully sleeping and did not have time to react to the attack. They showed no signs of trying to defend themselves, escape, or even get out of their sleeping bags, indicating a sudden and deliberate act that was similar to an execution or a revenge killing. The brutal murder of 2 individuals on a secluded beach left investigators with many questions but no clear answers. The beach was difficult to access, and there were no signs of anyone else being in the area. Despite a thorough search, no shell casings were found, leading investigators to believe that the shooter may have taken them or thrown them into the ocean. The fact that the shots were fired at close range into the victim's head suggested that the casings should have been nearby if they hadn't been deliberately moved. A search of the area revealed an empty beer bottle a few meters from the crime scene. This was notable because Lindsay and Jason did not drink alcohol and led a healthy lifestyle, suggesting that the bottle may have belonged to the shooter. The brand of beer was unusual for the area and was more commonly found in a neighboring state. Although it was unclear whether the bottle was connected to the crime, it was considered a significant lead in the investigation. A theory emerged that Lindsay and Jason may have had a confrontation with someone the day before their deaths, and this person may have returned at night with a gun to settle the dispute. Although Jason and Lindsay were known for being friendly, it was possible they may have unknowingly offended someone. Additionally, the shooter may have been intoxicated or mentally unstable. Examination of the bullets found in the victim's skulls showed they came from a rare Marlin rifle, specifically a .45 caliber Model 18, produced in 1994 by Marlin Firearms Company. This type of rifle was typically used for hunting and was often part of a collector's arsenal. This discovery was a significant lead in the investigation, but it remained the only concrete clue at the time. Investigation suggested that the shooter was likely a lone male. He may have been a hunter, collector, or gun enthusiast. To further the investigation, authorities aimed to reconstruct their final route, identify who they may have contacted, and determine when they were last seen alive. Fortunately, they had taken many photos, and their camera was found intact among their belongings, which provided a useful starting point for tracking their movements. A guest book at a tourist cabin near the lookout point, where they had parked their car, contained entries expressing their delight with the weekend getaway. They had also visited a fishing pier about 20 miles away on Saturday, as evidenced by the photographs they took. Police officers returned to the pier and interviewed locals to find people who may have seen something significant. Several people remembered a young couple in a red car who inquired about overnight accommodations but found all 3 nearby hotels fully booked due to peak tourist season. They had dinner at a local restaurant, walked around the area, and took photos before leaving in the evening. According to those who saw and interacted with them, they was friendly, did not engage in any conflicts, and seemed carefree and happy. However, none of the witnesses could recall anything unusual or suspicious. The location where the bodies were found was a protected area, closed to camping. However, the young couple had nowhere else to stay overnight, so they decided to camp on the beach, using sleeping bags instead of a tent. They felt safe on the secluded beach on a warm August night and planned to return to the rock and water camp on Sunday. This information helped investigators narrow down the time frame of their deaths. Since they went to sleep but didn't survive until morning, it's likely they were killed between 11 p.m. on Saturday and dawn on Sunday. Despite the ongoing investigation and public appeals for information, police withheld certain details, including the results of the ballistics analysis. This action was taken to prevent the suspect from being tipped off and getting rid of the murder weapon before the investigation could start. The investigation first focused on a local homeless man who was known to sleep on the beach where the crime occurred. He was found and questioned by police, but despite not having an alibi for the night of the crime, he was not confirmed to be involved. The main reasons for this were that the murder weapon was never found and his DNA did not match the DNA found on a beer bottle discovered at the crime scene. The case went cold for nearly 2 years, but in the spring of 2006, police decided to release more information about the crime, including details about the weapon used. They also offered a $50,000 reward for any information that could help identify the perpetrator and solve the case. Following the public appeal, authorities received over 1,000 calls, but only a few were useful for the investigation. One individual, 26 years old Sean Gallen, drew particular attention from several locals who described him as an aggressive collector of firearms and blades. He was reportedly prone to conflicts, had a history of property damage, and frequently threatened violent behavior. The police investigated Sean Gallen and questioned him because they already knew him from previous incidents involving fights and drunk driving. Upon inspecting his possessions, Sean did possess numerous weapons but did not own the rifle in question. Authorities were unable to verify his whereabouts around the time of the crime due to the year gap, and his DNA did not match the sample found on the beer bottle at the crime scene, forcing his release. Meanwhile, international authorities were investigating another individual, 61 years old Joseph Henry Burgess, who made locals nervous due to his tendency to carry firearms and exhibit aggressive behavior. Burgess was described as erratic, often claiming he received orders from God, sparking suspicion that he could be the perpetrator. Joseph Burgess was living in Canada in the late 1970s, feeling lost and without a clear sense of purpose or direction in his life. In 1978, he joined the Children of God commune, presenting himself as a deeply devoted individual. Those around him considered him excessively zealous. A rivalry with two young members escalated into hostility, and shortly after, both individuals were found dead with multiple close-range gunshot wounds to the head. The circumstances of their deaths were particularly notable. Their bodies were discovered in sleeping bags on a beach, suggesting they were shot while asleep. By the time the authorities arrived, Joseph had disappeared. Although evidence left behind implicated him in the crime, he had already fled to the United States, crossing the border illegally. Joseph managed to evade capture for nearly 25 years until the police linked him to a double homicide in California. However, the opportunity to question him was lost when a shootout occurred during his arrest, resulting in the deaths of both a police sergeant and Joseph, who initiated the gunfire. This ultimately unresolved case remained shrouded in mystery. A 35-year-old man named Seamus Gallen was killed by his younger brother, Sean Gallen. The brothers had gotten into an argument, during which Sean, who was under the influence of illicit substances, shot Seamus 3 times with a gun. Sean had a history with the police, having been previously investigated for a double murder on a beach, but was released due to lack of evidence. Since then, Sean had been in trouble with the law twice for causing property damage and making threats, but only received fines. It was also discovered that Sean was an avid hunter and enjoyed making knives and other bladed weapons. People who knew him described him as antisocial, aggressive, and unpredictable. After killing his brother, Sean tried to run away but was caught almost immediately. The police decided to take another look at Sean's possible involvement in a crime that happened 13 years ago. They found useful information on his social media page, where he had posted pictures of his large collection of weapons and talked about his supposed psychic abilities. According to his posts, Sean believed he was on a special mission and was receiving instructions from outer space. Sean's behavior initially led police to suspect that he had serious mental health issues. He refused to cooperate with the investigation, spoke incoherently, and maintained his innocence. A new lead was found by investigators who examined private messages on the deceased brother's social media page, something no one anticipated. In 2006, a $50,000 reward had been offered for information about a double homicide case. Sean's former girlfriend had messaged his brother, suggesting that she could claim the reward by turning Sean in. It appeared that both the girlfriend and the brother had knowledge about the case, but they had chosen to remain silent. Unfortunately, it was no longer possible to question either of them, as the brother had been shot and the girlfriend had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. However, when Sean was shown the printouts of the messages between his former girlfriend and his brother, he made a shocking confession. Despite his initial denials, Sean began to provide a detailed account of the events surrounding the double homicide. His recollection of the details was vivid, even though more than 13 years had passed since the crime occurred. One evening, a man left his house with a Marlin rifle, planning to hunt in a nearby wooded area. However, after wandering aimlessly for a couple of hours, he decided to head down to a nearby beach, which he believed was a good spot to find wild boars. As he walked along the shore, he came across 2 sleeping bags with a young man and woman asleep inside. He stood there watching them for several minutes, when suddenly he heard voices in his head telling him to kill them. The man claimed that this was a mission from outer space that he had to carry out. So, he pointed his rifle directly at the young man's head and fired, instantly killing him. The sound of the shot woke she, but before she could even process what was happening, the man fired again, killing her as well. He then picked up the spent casings and put them in an empty beer can he had been carrying. Later, he threw the can into some bushes in his father's backyard, where he also hid the rifle, asking his father to keep it for him. Sean's father hid the murder weapon in the cellar of his old barn without asking any questions. Remarkably, Sean's account of the crime was later confirmed. When the barn eventually collapsed, the rifle was discovered at the site, and a beer can with shell casings was still hidden in the overgrown bushes in the backyard. The property's abandonment after Sean's father passed away in 2009 had helped preserve these key pieces of evidence. A beer bottle found on the beach was initially considered evidence, but it was later discovered to be unrelated to the crime. Sean claimed that voices in his head ordered him to commit violent acts and that he was not aware of his actions when he committed the crime. His defense argued that Sean was mentally ill and unfit to stand trial. The court relied on expert psychiatrists to assess the validity of these claims. The psychiatric evaluation found that Sean did indeed suffer from multiple mental health disorders, which were exacerbated by his use of alcohol and prohibited substances. However, the evaluation also showed that at the time of the crime, Sean acted with deliberation and careful planning, fully aware of his actions and the need to cover his tracks to avoid detection. Specifically, Sean deliberately killed the young man first, knowing that she would be less able to resist or defend herself if anything went wrong. Sean carefully removed the casings and handed the rifle to his father, instructing him to conceal it. Although psychiatrists diagnosed Sean with mental issues, they concluded he was mentally fit to stand trial and be held accountable for his actions. Notably, his family and former girlfriend were aware of or suspected his involvement in the double homicide, yet none of them reported him to the police. Sean's trial took place in the spring of 2019, nearly 15 years after the double homicide. On June 17, 2019, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without parole, plus an additional 94 years for killing his brother in 2017. He is currently serving his sentence in a special prison unit for inmates with mental disorders. Due to his continued claims of hearing voices and aggressive behavior, he is closely monitored to prevent harm to himself or others. The motive behind the double homicide was never established. According to reports, Sean randomly encountered they sleeping on the beach and decided to end their lives without apparent reason. Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Tanya McKinley. Tanya McKinley was born on January 25, 1961, in the small town of Milton, Florida. She grew up in a loving family and was very close to her older sister. After graduating from high school, Tanya decided to move to Pensacola, a town about 25 miles away from her hometown. She pursued a career in the medical field. Tanya moved to a new city with her cousin Vanita, and they shared an apartment. After moving in, Tanya met a man named James, and they began dating. They eventually moved in together and had a son, Timothy, in 1983. Although Tanya was happy to be a mother, her relationship with James was troubled. They argued frequently, and about a year after their son was born, they decided to go their separate ways. By the end of 1984, Tanya was temporarily living with Vanita, who was now married with 2 children. Tanya planned to find her own place as soon as possible. On New Year's Eve, Tanya, Vanita, and her husband decided to celebrate at a local bar. They left their children at a late-night daycare. Around midnight, Vanita and her husband were getting ready to leave, but Tanya wanted to stay a little longer. Since the daycare closed at 1 a.m., Vanita agreed to pick up Tanya's son, allowing Tanya to stay at the bar. Before leaving, Vanita asked Tanya how she planned to get home, since they had driven there together. Tanya replied that she would get a ride from their acquaintance at the bar. However, when Vanita woke up on January 1st, she found that Tanya had not yet returned home. At first, Vanita thought Tanya might have slept over with a friend, so she was not too worried. Then, Vanita's mother-in-law arrived with heartbreaking news. Tanya had been found dead around 3 a.m. A Pensacola resident was on her way to the vet with her daughter. While driving, her daughter pointed out a person on the side of the road. Pensacola thought it might be a mannequin, but when she got out to check, she discovered it was a human body. Pensacola immediately returned home and called the police. Upon arriving at the scene, officers found the body of a woman lying in an empty lot beside the road. She had no shoes, her tights were down, and her dress was pulled up. Near the body, a blue towel with what appeared to be bloodstains was found. The police identified the victim as 23-year-old Tanya McKinley. Further investigation led them to discover her shoes and purse nearby, containing identification with her name on it. The body was turned over to medical experts for further examination. Meanwhile, police continued to process the crime scene. They soon discovered that Tanya likely did not die where she was found. There was no significant blood near the body, except for a stain on a towel, and signs on the ground suggested that the body had been dragged to the side of the road. On the towel and Tanya's body, investigators found several clues, including dog hair and a human hair. They suspected that the hair belonged to the killer, and that the killer may have owned a dog. Medical experts determined that the Tanya had suffered a head injury from a heavy object, but her cause of death was actually strangulation. They also confirmed that the Tanya had been sexually assaulted. A semen sample was collected from her body, but at the time, DNA analysis was not yet widely used in forensic science. However, the experts were able to establish that the suspect had type B blood. Police began to develop a list of potential suspects. Police turned their attention to Tanya's ex-husband, James. After talking to Tanya's family and friends, police discovered that James and Tanya had argued frequently before and after the birth of their son. When Tanya decided to end the relationship, James was unhappy and tried to convince her to stay. Police believe that James followed Tanya to the bar on New Year's Eve, leading to a confrontation that ended in murder. They brought James in for questioning, but he denied any involvement in the crime. He also agreed to provide hair samples for comparison. Although experts were unable to extract DNA from the samples, they were able to compare the hairs under a microscope. The results showed that James' hair was significantly different from the hair found on Tanya's body and the towel. As a result, the police temporarily ruled him out as a suspect. Police focused on everyone who was at the bar on New Year's Eve. They asked Vanita if she had noticed anyone acting strangely or aggressively toward Tanya, but she said the evening had gone off without incident. Police also discovered that after Tanya split from her ex-husband, she had started dating a man named Kurt, who was a bartender at the bar where she spent New Year's Eve. Kurt was working the night of the murder. When questioned, Kurt denied any involvement in the crime, claiming he had gone to a New Year's party with friends after his shift. The police reviewed all the testimony and concluded that Kurt had enough time to commit the crime. Based on numerous interviews with people at the bar, the police determined that Tanya was last seen alive at 1:15 a.m., but no one saw her leave. The police also spoke with local residents where the body was discovered. A family reported driving past the scene at around 2 a.m. and were certain that there was no body at that time. This meant that Tanya was killed about 1.5 hours after she was last seen alive. During this time, Kurt was unable to provide an alibi. He volunteered to take a lie detector test, but the results were inconclusive, and further investigation revealed that Kurt's blood type did not match the killer's blood type, as determined by a semen sample. As a result, Kurt was cleared of the crime. Unable to analyze DNA from the killer's semen, and with no witnesses or concrete evidence, police could only assume that the perpetrator likely lived in the area where the body was discovered. The case had been closed for years due to lack of concrete evidence. Timothy, who was only 18 months old when his mother died, was raised by his father and Tanya's family. Together, they kept the truth about his mother's death a secret. When Timothy was 14 years old, he was informed that his mother had died in a car accident. As Christmas approached that year, out of curiosity, he searched his father's closet for his present, and Timothy stumbled upon a shocking letter addressed to television host Montel Williams, written by his father himself. In a letter, Timothy's father wrote asking for help in solving the murder of Timothy's mother, Tanya. The letter included a detailed account of the crime, which was the first time Timothy learned of his mother's tragic fate. Years later, in the early 2000s, police reopened Tanya's case, hoping that advances in DNA technology might help identify the killer. Police sent all available evidence to a lab for analysis. Experts discovered that the blood on a blue towel near Tanya's body came from a man, not Tanya. They created a DNA profile of the unidentified man and uploaded it to the FBI database. But there were no matches. The case was put on hold until 2015, when it was reopened, 30 years after the murder. Through investigation, the police discovered from the FBI's archive database that a person had some similarities with the DNA found at Tanya's crime scene. However, the match was not strong. To investigate further, the police learned about the person's family background and even contacted his relatives for assistance. These relatives cooperated and provided DNA samples for comparison. Unfortunately, the DNA analysis showed that his family was not involved in Tanya's death, leaving the police with no new leads. In 2018, a journalist named Tony Adam became interested in Tanya's case. Tony contacted the police offering help. And the police became suspicious of his involvement. Tony joined the investigation despite having no background in criminal investigations. The police, who had made little progress in the case, hoped that Tony's involvement wouldn't hinder the investigation. In 2019, a year after Tony got involved, police decided to identify the killer's relatives. This time, they enlisted the help of Parabon, a genetic genealogy company, and expanded the search to include primarily the DNA of known criminals. Parabon expanded its search to public genetic databases, which were much larger in scope. Unlike DNA evidence collected from a crime scene, these databases contain DNA samples that people have voluntarily uploaded to find relatives. To find the killer, experts used a process of elimination, carefully analyzing the family trees of potential relatives to identify someone who matched their suspect's criteria. They were looking for a man who was at least old enough to have committed the crime in 1985 and had a connection to the area where the crime was committed. In 2020, police identified a suspect in Tanya's murder. Daniel Wells, 57, had been arrested in the late 1980s for assault and indecent exposure. At the time, he was living in Pensacola, working as a carpenter and living with his wife and children. But to confirm whether Daniel was actually the killer, detectives needed to compare his DNA to the profile they collected from the crime scene. To prevent Daniel from fleeing, the police approached cautiously. They kept watch, waiting for an opportunity to collect a DNA sample from him without arousing Daniel's suspicion. Daniel threw a cigarette butt out of the car window near his workplace. The police collected the cigarette butt and immediately sent it to the lab for analysis. Experts extracted DNA from the saliva on the filter and compared it to the DNA of the killer in the Tanya case. The results were a match. The police eventually identified Daniel as the culprit and arrested him the same day. Despite the DNA test results, the police still tried to get Daniel to confess. They arranged for a patrol officer to stop Daniel's car under the pretext of doing a routine ID check. Detectives then approached Daniel, informing him that he needed to accompany them to the station without providing any further explanation. By withholding information, they intentionally kept Daniel in suspense, allowing them to proceed with the investigation cautiously. The police approached Daniel, informing him that he needed to come with them to the police station without further explanation. During the investigation, the detectives slowly steered the conversation toward Tanya's murder, asking Daniel about his whereabouts on the night of the murder. At first, he claimed to have never seen Tanya. However, when the detectives revealed that his DNA was found at the crime scene, his story began to unfold. As the questioning continued, Daniel's denials became increasingly unconvincing, and he grew more and more agitated. Detectives made it clear that the DNA evidence was irrefutable and that he would face consequences for his actions. As the interrogation continued, Daniel denied his guilt and became increasingly agitated. The police said the DNA evidence was incontrovertible and he would face the consequences for his actions. Faced with the evidence, Daniel finally broke down and began to speak. He and Tanya went to his house, where they had sex after drinking. However, an argument broke out, the argument escalated, and in a fit of rage, Daniel picked up a heavy wooden cutting board and hit Tanya over the head. When he realized she was dead, Daniel panicked and dumped her body in a location where it was later discovered. On his way back, Daniel discarded the Tanya's belongings and returned home. When questioned about the dog hairs found on the Tanya's clothes and towel, he attributed them to his roommate's black Labrador. Contrary to Daniel's claim that Tanya died from a head injury, the medical evidence clearly showed that the cause of death was strangulation. In a possible chain of events, Daniel struck Tanya in the head, but when he realized she was still alive, he resorted to strangling her. The police gathered enough evidence to arrest him for murder. Police then contacted Tanya's family, including her son Timothy, to inform them of the developments in the case. Timothy was deeply moved, thanking the police for finally identifying his mother's killer. 2 weeks after his arrest, Daniel's body was found in his cell. An investigation confirmed that he had committed suicide. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery, the case of Sarah Foxwell. Sarah Foxwell was born on May 18, 1998, in Salisbury, Maryland, into a large family with 2 sisters and 4 brothers. Her mother had 3 additional children from a previous marriage. After her parents divorced, Sarah's mother struggled to care for her children alone. She worked long hours, so the children often stayed with relatives. As the middle child, Sarah played a peacemaking role, usually managing to bring her siblings together despite their frequent arguments. In December 2009, 11-year-old Sarah temporarily moved in with her aunt and grandparents, who lived in a spacious farmhouse on the outskirts of Salisbury. The kids loved visiting their aunt's home, which offered plenty of room to play. On December 22, 2009, the whole family was filled with joy and excitement, eagerly awaiting the upcoming Christmas day. After a pizza dinner, they began getting ready for bed around 9 p.m. Sarah shared a room with her 6-year-old sister, Emma, at the end of the hallway near the back door. The sisters chatted for a bit before falling asleep. The next morning, Sarah's grandfather went to wake the kids, but only found Emma in the room. He searched the entire house, thinking Sarah might have already gotten up, but couldn't find her anywhere. He informed Sarah's aunt, and together they thoroughly searched every room and corner of the house. When they couldn't find Sarah, her aunt suggested she might have gone outside to play in the snow, but her shoes and jacket were still at home. Then, her aunt noticed that Sarah's toothbrush was missing from the bathroom. After searching the surrounding area and finding no Sarah, her aunt called Sarah's mother, who rushed over. They then contacted the police, who arrived quickly and began searching the house. Sarah's aunt explained that she always checked the doors and windows every night before bed, including the previous evening, and the police couldn't find any signs of Sarah inside or nearby. When they learned about the missing toothbrush, the officers considered the possibility of an abduction, thinking the kidnapper might have taken the toothbrush before leaving with Sarah. They then decided to verify if all the doors and windows were indeed locked as Sarah's aunt had claimed. As investigators approached the back door next to Sarah's room, they found it unlocked, despite her aunt's insistence that it had been locked the night before. This discovery raised suspicions, since the family kept a spare key outside, which was now missing. The fact that the perpetrator knew about the spare key shows that he was very familiar with this family. Furthermore, the family's dog, which normally barked at strangers, had remained silent that night. The police launched a massive search operation, fearing that Sarah might have been kidnapped. News of her disappearance spread quickly, prompting many local residents to contact the police and offer their assistance. The police chief has made a public appeal through the media, asking people to check their cameras for any suspicious activity. Dozens of local police officers joined the search, with assistance from neighboring town police departments and police from other states. The police were hopeful that they would find Sarah alive, as the perpetrator had taken her toothbrush, which could indicate that they intended to keep her alive. With this in mind, the police dedicated all their resources to the search. Outside the house, investigators found their first clue: fresh tire tracks in the snow, suggesting the kidnapper had arrived by car. Since Sarah's warm clothing was still at home, it was unlikely the kidnapper had taken her on foot. Meanwhile, at the police station, Sarah's family was in for a surprise. Her 6-year-old sister, Emma, who shared a room with Sarah, whispered to their grandmother that she had seen the person who took Sarah. Emma claimed she had woken up to a man talking to Sarah, but pretended to be asleep, unsure of what was happening. She then saw the man leave the room with Sarah. What Emma said next sent shockwaves through the family. She knew the man who took Sarah. It was Mr. Thomas, the ex-boyfriend of Sarah's aunt. A man named Thomas had a history of violence against women and girls. Despite his criminal record, he spent a lot of time at Aunt Sarah's house and the children got to know him. The police knew Thomas well because he had many criminal records. Thomas first went to prison at 18 for attacking a 12-year-old girl, but he was released early after just a few months. He was sentenced again for assaulting another minor, but he was released early once more, this time after serving 6 months due to good behavior. Thomas continued to exhibit violent behavior, including another assault for which he received a 6-month sentence. He also tried to assault a girl on the same day his wife returned home from the hospital with their newborn baby. His wife eventually divorced him and obtained a restraining order after he threatened to kill her and their daughter. In another disturbing incident, Thomas targeted 2 young girls sitting on a porch. He approached them, claiming he had been watching one of them play in the yard, and called her a wild girl. He then used a stick to hit her on the buttocks, prompting her to run inside and tell her mother about the attack. She recognized Thomas from the window and recalled seeing his face before she moved into the house. She had previously checked the local sex offender registry and found his photo listed. She immediately reported him to the police, and the case proceeded to court. However, Thomas avoided punishment for his actions. Before the trial, she was threatened not to mention that Thomas was a sex offender and had a previous conviction for sexual assault. A few months prior to Sarah's disappearance, Thomas was arrested again for breaking into a 24-year-old woman's bedroom at night, undressing, and masturbating beside her bed. He was released on bail after his arrest. Initially, Thomas hid his criminal past from Sarah's aunt, but she eventually discovered the truth. Despite this, Thomas managed to persuade her that the accusations against him were false and that he was innocent. Detectives are certain that Thomas was the person who kidnapped Sarah. This suspicion was reinforced by the fact that during his relationship with Sarah's aunt, he had spent an inordinate amount of time with Sarah, more so than with the other children in the household. At the time, this behavior didn't seem unusual, but now that Sarah is missing, it appears highly suspicious. To further investigate, the police visited Thomas's residence, a shed located on his parents' property just a few miles away. They brought him in for questioning and obtained a search warrant for the shed. Upon searching, they found it to be in disarray with poor living conditions, but no evidence linking Thomas to Sarah's disappearance was discovered. However, the police did find a large collection of adult magazines and DVDs, which filled the shed. During the interrogation, Thomas denied any involvement in Sarah's disappearance. He claimed that he was struggling with his own personal issues, specifically his tendency to commit crimes against underage girls. According to Thomas, he had made a conscious effort to avoid being alone with the children while dating Sarah's aunt, in order to avoid any false accusations. When confronted with Emma's testimony, which placed him at the scene of the abduction, Thomas dismissed her account, stating that she had a history of fabricating stories and that he was not there on the night in question. Detectives were skeptical of Thomas's story. It wasn't just because of his prior convictions. As they questioned him about 11-year-old Sarah's disappearance, Thomas seemed to take pleasure in the situation, smiling and mocking the sheriff. Although it is certain that he planned the crime without any mistakes, the police still work hard to solve the case and find out the truth about what really happened. Thomas claimed to have a solid alibi, stating he was at a bar with a friend until late at night. However, investigators found a discrepancy in his story. Although he was indeed at the bar, he left around 1 a.m. and wasn't seen again until 7 a.m. the next morning. A review of his phone records revealed that he had sent messages to several women, proposing to meet up, but all of them declined. Despite the inconsistencies in Thomas's story, detectives still couldn't gather enough evidence to incriminate him. Their primary concern was finding Sarah, and they poured all their resources into the search. A search of Thomas's pickup truck yielded several crucial clues. Inside, they found Sarah's green toothbrush and a large lollipop, which suggested that Thomas might have used the candy to lure her into his vehicle. Furthermore, the tire tracks on his truck matched the ones found in the snow outside the house on the night of Sarah's disappearance. Thomas had lied about not visiting Aunt Sarah's house for more than a month. This did not deter the police and volunteers from continuing their search Sarah. They searched extensively, covering many miles around her house, checking abandoned buildings, forests, ravines, and bodies of water. K-9 units and helicopters assisted in the search. The community provided immense support to the police efforts, with hundreds signing up to volunteer. The poor weather and upcoming holidays did not dampen the search, but unfortunately, the efforts yielded no results. The search party resumed early the next morning, with their numbers increasing rather than dwindling. Eventually, the number of volunteers swelled to 3,000 people. Due to the sheer volume of volunteers, the coordination center had to be relocated from the police station to a larger venue, the local baseball stadium. Many of the volunteers brought their children to assist, handing out essentials such as water, hot tea, and food. Despite the odds, the search continued with renewed determination to find Sarah alive. While investigators were questioning Thomas, they received another crucial piece of evidence. After he was brought to the station, his clothes were sent to the lab for analysis. Experts discovered foreign DNA on Thomas's underwear, which they compared to a DNA sample from Sarah's belongings. The results showed a complete match, leading detectives to a disturbing conclusion. It appeared that Thomas had sexually assaulted Sarah after abducting her. Despite the lack of progress in the search, thousands of people gathered on Christmas Day, December 25th, to continue looking for Sarah. Meanwhile, investigators obtained GPS data from Thomas's phone, which showed the cell towers his phone had connected to, although the exact locations were not provided. Police discovered that on the night Sarah vanished, her phone had connected to 3 cell towers, allowing them to narrow down the search area to a roughly triangular zone. Investigators focused on this location, located near the state border, about 8 miles from Sarah's aunt's home. The area was densely wooded, but hundreds of people thoroughly searched every inch of the territory, holding out hope for a Christmas miracle that Sarah would be found alive. Sadly, the outcome was far more tragic. Around 4 p.m., police discovered Sarah's body on the ground, near the state border. She was lying on her back with her arms raised upwards, pointing towards the sky. Medical experts performed an autopsy and were shocked by what they discovered. They confirmed that Sarah had been sexually assaulted and showed signs of strangulation. Additionally, experts found dirt in Sarah's lungs, suggesting that the perpetrator had attempted to drown her in a puddle. During this torture, Sarah lost consciousness. The experts also found evidence that Sarah had suffered severe burns. It is believed that the perpetrator may have left her lying in the forest for some time, went to get gasoline, and then returned to set Sarah on fire. Significantly, traces of smoke were found in her lungs, indicating that she was still alive when the fire was set. This also explains why her hands were raised and pointing to the sky. Likely a reflex reaction to the fire. The sheer cruelty of these actions shocked and horrified everyone involved in the case, including the detectives. After reconstructing the case, the investigators' main goal is to ensure that the perpetrator, Thomas, receives the death penalty. Thomas continued to deny any involvement in Sarah's disappearance, but the evidence against him was substantial. After discovering Sarah's body, forensic experts found several strands of hair and pieces of fabric from Sarah's pajamas on the front seat of Thomas's pickup truck, further linking him to her kidnapping. Based on all the evidence, it is very unlikely that Thomas will escape punishment. The trial was delayed for over a year, but it never took place. In early 2011, the prosecution offered Thomas a plea deal. Under the terms of the agreement, Thomas would plead guilty and receive a life sentence, rather than facing the death penalty. While this deal may seem lenient considering Thomas's crimes, there were valid reasons for accepting it. A key consideration was that Sarah's younger sister would have to testify multiple times in court, facing the man who had murdered her sister. Sarah's kidnapping and murder were devastating for her family, and there was a risk that the trial's outcome might not bring them the justice they sought. Due to uncertainty about securing the death penalty, the prosecution presented a plea deal. This deal meant that Thomas would not receive the death penalty, and in return, he would plead guilty to the crime. The terms of the deal also ensured that Thomas would not be eligible for early release from prison. Another issue was that the state governor at the time opposed the death penalty. Ultimately, Thomas agreed to the deal and confessed to the detectives, revealing details they already knew. He admitted to tricking Sarah into leaving her house with him, then taking her away, sexually assaulting her, and killing her. As a result, Thomas received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole and was transferred to a maximum security prison. During his initial days in prison, Thomas was assaulted by a fellow inmate with a homemade weapon during lunch, resulting in several severe lacerations. Despite the attack, Thomas survived and was later given increased protection by prison staff. The public was outraged by Sarah's case, which exposed repeated failures in Thomas's custody, allowing him to be released but continue to commit crimes. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case, the case of Doreen Herbert. Doreen Herbert was born on November 29, 1952, in California. She grew up in a very large family of 5 children. Her kindness and desire to help others defined her as a person. After college, she moved to San Francisco, where she worked as a physiotherapist. Doreen also nurtured a dream of creating her own large family. This aspiration became a reality when she met Michael Dennis, who worked near her clinic. They began dating, got married, and in 1976, their son Paul was born. Initially, Michael and Doreen were happy, but the birth of their child marked the beginning of their marital troubles. A year later, they decided to go their separate ways, with their son staying with Doreen and Michael receiving regular visitation rights. Doreen and her family were still able to maintain a fairly stable life despite the many hardships they faced. She met Charles, and they started dating, eventually getting married and settling in a quiet neighborhood in San Jose. They was thrilled when their daughter Diana was born in 1979. Charles was eager to be a father and was delighted to welcome Diana, raising her alongside Doreen's son from a previous relationship. Tragedy struck in February 1980 when disaster befell their young family. 4-year-old Paul slipped through the fence surrounding their backyard pool and fell into the water. Doreen, who was at home at the time, discovered what had happened too late. She immediately pulled Paul from the water and called for emergency services. Paul was rushed to the hospital and connected to life support, but after 10 agonizing days, the medical team concluded that he had no chance of recovery. The heartbreaking decision was made to disconnect Paul from life support. Doreen was heartbroken and consumed by guilt, despite the police investigation clearing her of any blame. However, with the help of her young daughter, she slowly began to heal. For years after the traumatic event, the family finally received some good news. After 2 previous miscarriages, Doreen became pregnant again, and this time, everything seemed to be going smoothly. They was expecting a baby boy, due to arrive in early November. Just days before Doreen's scheduled hospital visit, the family decided to participate in Halloween festivities. On the evening of October 31st, the neighborhood was filled with decorated homes, children trick-or-treating, and parents handing out candy. Diana, now 4 years old, was excited to join in and her parents agreed. Although Doreen was 9 months pregnant, she accompanied her daughter on the trick-or-treating adventure, while Charles stayed home to hand out candy to other children. Charles and his wife, Doreen, had returned home from taking their daughter trick-or-treating. Just before 9 p.m., noticing they were running low on candy, Charles decided to make a quick trip to the nearby store to restock. At around 8:50 p.m., he left the house, leaving his wife and daughter behind. 15 minutes later, he returned home to find the front door slightly ajar, which seemed suspicious. As he entered the house, he was met with a horrific scene. His wife, Doreen, lay on the floor in the corridor, surrounded by a large amount of blood and showed no signs of life. Charles immediately called 911. In the living room, he then found the body of their unborn child. Charles was in shock, struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. At first he wondered if Doreen had had a miscarriage, but he quickly realized that something much more serious had happened. Next to their unborn child lay Doreen's best severed hand, making it clear to Charles that his family had been attacked. Fearing for his daughter's safety, he frantically searched for her. There was so much blood on the floor that he slipped and fell while running through the house. Eventually, he found his daughter hiding behind the sofa in the living room. She is still alive and unhurt. When paramedics arrived, they found Doreen's weak pulse and rushed her to the hospital. Tragically, Doreen did not survive and was pronounced dead in the ambulance. Her unborn child also did not survive. The attacker had inflicted severe injuries on the baby after removing it from Doreen's womb. A post-mortem examination revealed that Doreen had been stabbed multiple times with a long, sharp object, possibly a sword or machete. The crime scene was particularly disturbing, with blood covering the floors, walls, and ceiling. Police officers at the scene were deeply affected by what they witnessed. Despite a thorough search of the house, no signs of the perpetrator or any evidence were found. However, investigators did discover bloody footprints leading from the house to the middle of the road, suggesting that the killer may have escaped in a vehicle. Soon, investigators found another crucial piece of evidence on the lawn in front of the house, a wolf mask covered in blood. They believed it might belong to the killer, as Charles reported they didn't own such a mask. The evidence was sent to the laboratory for analysis. and police attempted to question Diana, who was the only witness in this incident. Although shaken and in complete shock, Diana provided valuable details about what happened. She explained that shortly after her father left for the store, someone knocked on their door. When Doreen answered, she saw a man wearing a wolf mask and holding a long blade. He threatened to kill her, and Doreen immediately screamed at Diana to run out of the house. Diana hid behind the sofa but couldn't recall what happened next until her father found her. Initially, the police found it suspicious that the victim's husband, Charles, had left for the store just minutes before the killer arrived. This coincidence led investigators to consider him as a potential suspect. When Charles returned home, he unknowingly stepped on blood multiple times, even falling and getting covered in it. Despite this, Diana was unable to help identify the attacker due to the wolf mask. Police initially considered the possibility that Charles might have intentionally gotten blood on his clothes to create an alibi. However, detectives quickly discovered several inconsistencies in this theory. Firstly, Charles's shoes did not match the bloody footprints found on the street. Secondly, the killer likely escaped in a car parked in front of the house, but no blood was found in Charles's vehicle, nor was a different pair of shoes discovered. To investigate further, police went to the store that Charles had visited that evening and spoke to the staff there. They confirmed that Charles had indeed purchased candy from him. This established an alibi for Charles, as he didn't have enough time to commit the murder. Surveillance footage from the store supported Charles's account, leading detectives to temporarily rule him out as the prime suspect. They then asked Charles if he knew of anyone who might want to harm his family. Charles immediately pointed out Michael, Doreen's ex-husband. According to Charles, Michael's behavior changed dramatically after the death of their son, who had drowned in the pool. Michael blamed Doreen for the boy's death, believing she had deliberately killed Paul to cut ties with him. Michael filed a lawsuit against his ex-wife Doreen, holding her responsible for the death of Paul, but lost the case. Their marriage had been troubled even before their divorce. After the birth of their son, Michael's behavior became increasingly erratic, often withdrawing into depression and distancing himself from his family. Doreen suspected that Michael's childhood traumas were to blame. As a child, Michael had hearing problems and wore a bulky hearing aid, which earned him constant teasing from his peers. This led to him growing up as an introvert with few friends and a fear of interacting with women. Although his relationship with Doreen seemed to have helped him overcome these issues, they eventually resurfaced and contributed to their decision to divorce. When Doreen married Charles, Michael began to resent her, particularly for the fact that another man was raising his son. These feelings became even worse after Paul's death, made Michael hate his ex-wife even more. Michael has also been unemployed for a long time, which had a significant impact on him. After considering this information, the detectives decided to visit Michael's house to speak with him. Although Charles's statement alone was not enough to make Michael the main suspect, the fact that Michael lived only 2 miles from Doreen's house prompted the detectives to pay him a visit immediately. The officers arrived at Michael's home around midnight and noticed a pickup truck parked near the garage. When police shined their flashlights on Michael's car, they saw blood on the steering wheel and keys. They knocked on the door, but no one answered. Lights were still on inside the house and they could hear running water, leading them to suspect that Michael might be destroying evidence or washing bloody clothes. They continued knocking until Michael opened the door. Michael remained calm, even after being informed Doreen's murder. Michael answered the officers' questions calmly and allowed them to enter his house without a warrant. He claimed that he had gone to the store earlier that day, returned home, and hadn't left since. He even agreed to sign a form allowing the police to search his home. However, as he reached for the pen to sign, officers noticed a deep cut on his right hand. Michael explained that he had accidentally cut himself while carving a pumpkin for Halloween, but the police were skeptical of his story. The wound was fresh, with blood still seeping out. As officers searched the house, Michael accompanied one of them upstairs to retrieve his ID. However, when Michael reached for the bed headboard, the officer intervened, sensing suspicious behavior. Why would Michael store his documents behind the bed? Curiosity led the police to conduct a deeper investigation. Upon approaching the bed, they spotted a holster attached to the headboard, containing a loaded gun. The officer confiscated the weapon and escorted Michael downstairs to the other officers. Meanwhile, the officers discovered a trail of blood droplets leading from the house to the garage. And they found a washing machine and a pile of clothes with bloodstains. This evidence is enough to arrest Michael. A thorough search of the house by detectives and forensic experts followed, seeking evidence that might link Michael to the murder. Although the blood analysis would take a few days, the police made some disturbing discoveries. They found an empty box for an 18-inch machete. Medical experts confirmed that the wounds from this knife matched the actual wounds found on Doreen's body. During the investigation, police found 2 makeshift coffins in Michael's house, leading them to believe that he was planning to harm his ex-wife, Doreen, and her husband. The presence of medical body bags at his home was also suspicious. As detectives pieced together the evidence, they went to a judge to request a warrant for Michael's arrest. However, due to a lack of concrete evidence, they were initially only able to hold him for a limited time. When the judge refused to issue an arrest warrant, citing insufficient circumstantial evidence to convict Michael, he was released from prison. But detectives eventually got vital information from the autopsy results. Experts discovered that the crime scene had blood from 2 individuals. One blood type was identified as Doreen's, and the other was Michael's. This evidence suggested that Michael had likely injured himself while attacking Doreen. With this new evidence, the judge quickly issued a warrant for Michael's arrest, charged him with the murder of Doreen and her unborn child. In addition, detectives discovered that Michael owned a wolf mask identical to the one found near Doreen's house the previous Halloween. Further inquiry revealed that Michael had worn the mask to a party, and a photograph of him wearing it was even obtained by police. To validate this, detectives searched Michael's home and found the same clothing he wore in the photo. To search for new clues to the case, the police interviewed Doreen's neighbors about the incidents that happened that night. Several children who were trick-or-treating reported seeing a man wearing a wolf mask standing across from Doreen's house, eyeing it intensely. This sighting occurred around 7 p.m., a full 2 hours before the murder. Michael's trial commenced in July 1988, 4 years after the crime. He initially pleaded guilty but later changed his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity. A psychologist evaluated Michael and diagnosed him with severe mental health issues. Michael claimed that the horror of Halloween was too much to bear, as the sight of children trick-or-treating reminded him of his own loss and triggered a mental breakdown. He alleged that this breakdown led him to visit Doreen's house armed with a machete on the evening of the murder. When Doreen opened the door, Michael revealed his true identity as the man behind the mask and made a shocking statement: she killed their son. Recognizing the man as Michael, Doreen quickly screamed for her daughter to run and Michael immediately attacked her. Michael claimed he was unaware that Doreen was pregnant at the time of the attack, but this assertion was met with skepticism. Doreen was visibly pregnant, standing at 4 feet 1 inches tall, and her friends found it hard to believe that Michael wouldn't have noticed, especially given her prominent belly. In fact, her friends joked that her pregnancy had made her almost as wide as she was tall. The prosecution argued that Michael was fully aware of his actions and had planned the crime in advance, a claim supported by evidence from the investigation. Detectives discovered that Michael had previously shared his desire to kill his ex-wife and her husband with friends, and had even discussed disposing of their bodies in the bay. The presence of 2 coffins and body bags in his home suggested that he was serious about carrying out this plan, and the prosecution argued that he had adjusted his intentions for some reason to target Doreen instead. Michael may have panicked or feared being caught, prompting him to leave the house quickly. During the trial, Doreen's 9-year-old daughter, Diana, testified about what she witnessed. Charles had wanted to spare his daughter the traumatic experience, but she was the only witness to the crime. The trial lasted a year, ultimately resulting in Michael's conviction for the murders of Doreen and her unborn child. Michael was sentenced to death, but a moratorium on the death penalty in California delayed his execution. As a result, Michael remains in prison, and his sentence will be no carried out. Years later, Diana revealed that the murder had such a profound effect on her, and she could never forget the horror she witnessed. Ultimately, Diana decides to forgive Michael and try to move past the past to focus on the future. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Jessica Knott. Jessica Knott was born on June 22, 1986, in Allamont Springs, Florida. She grew up in a loving family with her parents, an older brother, and a younger sister. Her father worked in construction and often traveled to other states for work, so her mother mainly took care of her and her siblings. Throughout her childhood, Jessica was a cheerful and active girl who loved playing outdoors with her friends and siblings and had a special love for animals. On April 5, 1996, when Jessica was 9 years old, her family planned to visit her grandparents for Easter. While her mother packed for the trip, her father went to the store to buy some vacation items. Jessica asked her mother if she could go to the yard to wait for her father to return. Her mother agreed but told her to stay in the yard and not wander off. The family's apartment complex was located in a quiet area, surrounded by many trees and away from the main road. The neighborhood was considered safe, and children often played outside without regular adult supervision. However, when Jessica's father returned home around 6 p.m., he asked his wife where Jessica was, and she was surprised to learn that Jessica was not in the yard as she had thought. The parents searched the yard but couldn't find their daughter Jessica. Growing increasingly worried, they started asking neighbors if they had seen Jessica. A neighbor reported seeing Jessica sitting on a bench, reading a book, but this information yielded no results. As night began to fall and Jessica was still missing, her parents contacted the police. The police quickly began search operations, questioning neighbors and canvassing the surrounding area. Despite their best efforts, they were unable to find Jessica, forcing the police to expand their search to nearby streets. A few hours later, the police received an unexpected call from an unknown number. The caller's voice was distorted by background noise. But the police determined that Jessica might have been near a water pumping station several miles from her home. When the police arrived at the water pumping station, they witnessed a horrifying scene. Jessica's body was discovered near the pumping station, hidden in a black trash bag. This location was only a few meters from the road, but the pumping station was located under a bridge, making it nearly impossible to detect. Next to the body were some magazines and a children's mirror. The police quickly identified the victim as Jessica Knott and handed her body over to the medical examiner for further investigation. Investigators turned their attention to tracing the 911 call, which they believed was made by the killer. Their goal was to use the call to identify the killer. However, the call was made from a public phone at a nearby gas station, and when the police arrived, the perpetrator had already fled. Detectives tried to take fingerprints, but it was a difficult task because this was a public phone booth, which likely had many fingerprints from different users. In addition, it was possible that the killer had wiped the phone clean after calling or had worn gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. Further investigation revealed that Jessica may have been killed elsewhere and her body moved to the water pumping station. Evidence on the ground showed that the killer pulled the body out of the car, then put it in a trash bag and dragged it to the water pumping station. Jessica's clothes were still intact, except for a missing shoe, which was not found at the scene. The only potential clue at the crime scene was tire tracks on the ground. There was a possibility that they belonged to the killer's car, so the police took photos and analyzed the prints. Meanwhile, a medical examination of the body showed that the victim died from strangulation, with marks on the face and neck indicating the killer used bare hands. An autopsy showed that Jessica had eaten a hamburger shortly before her death. Her mother said she did not give Jessica a hamburger that day, suggesting the killer may have provided her with food. Additionally, forensic experts found no evidence of sexual assault, leaving the killer's motive unknown. Initially, police had suspected Jessica's parents of being involved in her disappearance because they had not had a solid alibi. Jessica's mother had claimed that she had packed up the apartment, and her father had claimed that he had been out shopping, so they clearly had had the opportunity to commit the crime. The police had been confused as to how the killer had been able to get Jessica out of the yard without anyone noticing or her screaming, leading them to believe that the killer might have been someone Jessica knew and trusted, and she might have voluntarily left with them. The killer's voice on the 911 call had provided another clue. In the recording, experts had detected feelings of grief and remorse, suggesting that the killer had truly felt remorse for his actions. The fact that the killer had taken the risk of calling 911 suggested that they might have been trying to minimize guilt or manipulate the investigation. However, the obvious sadness in the killer's voice had led investigators to believe that the killer had likely been remorseful for his actions. The investigation had reached a turning point when police had found a roll of black garbage bags in the trunk of Jessica's father's car, similar to the bag used to dispose of the victim's body. However, expert examination had shown that the bags had come from another manufacturer, eliminating Jessica's father as a suspect. The focus of the investigation had then turned to other suspects. Forensic experts had conducted a thorough examination of the victim's clothes and body, thereby obtaining many clues. One notable discovery had been that there had been a significant amount of dog hair on Jessica's clothes, even though her family had not owned dogs. This suggested that the dog hair might have come from the perpetrator's dog. Additionally, human hair of an unidentified man had been found on Jessica's body, and experts had been working to extract the DNA profile from the sample. However, this process had taken several days. Further examination had revealed two strange fibers on Jessica's clothes that experts had analyzed and determined likely had originated from car seat covers and carpets. This finding had supported the theory that Jessica had been killed at a location other than the water pumping station and then transported there by car. To determine the breed of dog that had shed hair on Jessica's clothes, experts had used the FBI's specialized database, which contained microscopic photos of hair from many different dog breeds. By comparing fur samples with a database, experts had determined that the fur had belonged to a Shar-Pei. This discovery had suggested that the perpetrator might have owned the Shar-Pei and that the dog's fur had been transferred to Jessica's clothes at the perpetrator's home or in the car. According to investigators' initial theory, the killer might have lured Jessica into his car, taken her to buy hamburgers at McDonald's, and then taken her to his home, where she had been murdered. To aid the investigation, experts had tried to improve the quality of the phone call recordings, but this had proved difficult. They had decided to try a different approach and sought help from NASA, which had advanced audio enhancement tools originally designed for use in space recordings. NASA had agreed to assist and provide police with higher quality audio. However, experts still needed to sample the suspect's voice to compare with the call recording. Detectives had suspected that the killer might have known Jessica, so they had played the call recording for her mother, hoping she could recognize the voice. At first, she had said the voice was familiar but couldn't place it. When she had heard it a second time, she suddenly had realized that the voice belonged to a neighbor who had lived in their complex. Although she couldn't remember his name, she had told detectives that he often had taken his Shar-Pei for walks in the yard. Police had quickly identified this man as James Crow, 35 years old. Hours after Jessica had disappeared, investigators had questioned her neighbors, including James Crow. James had told them that he had seen Jessica in her yard while walking his dog, Pumpkin, a Shar-Pei. They had exchanged a few words and then he had left. Detectives had looked into his past and had found no history of criminal activity. He used to be a truck driver, but had been currently unemployed and had spent most of his time walking around the neighborhood with his dog. Detectives realized that the similarity in voice and breed of dog had not been enough to arrest James, so they obtained a search warrant for James' car. Inside, they found two disturbing clues. Under the front passenger seat, they discovered an empty Happy Meal bag, which was suspicious because James had no children and Jessica had had a McDonald's hamburger in her stomach. Additionally, the car had brand new tires that had barely been used, which James had claimed to have changed on the day Jessica was murdered. However, his previous tire had not been very old and could have lasted a few more years. Police investigated further and discovered that one of James' old tires had been left behind at an auto service. When they compared the tire tread pattern to prints found near Jessica's body, they did not match. However, it was possible that tire marks on the ground did not belong to the killer's car but to another vehicle. Police also searched James' apartment, where they found a box containing several rolls of trash bags similar in size and color to the one found on Jessica's body. To determine if there was any connection between the bags, detectives needed to find a way to prove that they had come from the same manufacturer. At first, this seemed impossible, as the bags had no distinctive markings or features and there were hundreds of manufacturers of similar products. The detectives had an idea to solve this problem. They contacted Roberts, a quality control specialist for the company that had manufactured the bags found in James' apartment. Roberts pinpointed the factory that had produced the bags based on a special code on the cardboard box containing the rolls. The code indicated that the product had come from a facility in Virginia. Roberts explained that a small amount of iron or titanium was added to the bag's composition, depending on its color. Because the factory produced bags in many different colors, the materials used in production changed constantly, causing the ratio of plastic and iron or titanium to change daily. To take advantage of this information, experts used high-intensity X-rays to measure the presence of iron and titanium in the plastic of handbags from the suspect's apartment and the crime scene. This analysis provided exact ratios of elements, which were identical in both bags. This suggested the bags had been made on the same day and possibly from the same batch. However, there was more to the story than that. During the production of garbage bags, microscopic debris accumulated on the machine and imprinted on the plastic sheets as they were rolled out. This created a unique stripe pattern on each bag, visible to the naked eye. Even though the debris on the conveyor belt was constantly changing, creating a new pattern every few hundred feet of fabric, the results were consistent enough to provide another possible lead in the investigation. The similarity of the bags suggested that not only had they been produced in the same batch, but they had also been produced within a short time frame, perhaps just a few hours apart. Comparison of the bags from the suspect's apartment and the crime scene revealed a striking match in the lines and patterns on the bags. On further inspection, experts showed that the bags had been rolled into bundles by machine, which could have created irregularities during the rolling process. Although these irregularities were hardly noticeable, they could be detected by examining the edges of the bag, where the folds formed a unique pattern. Upon re-examining the bags, experts discovered that the pattern on the bags at the suspect's apartment matched the pattern at the crime scene. Further analysis also revealed that fibers found on Jessica's clothing had matched the carpet in James' apartment and the upholstery of his car seat. An audio expert had also analyzed the 911 call recording and compared it to James's voice sample, concluding that the voice in the recording belonged to James. Although the evidence was only circumstantial, detectives still believed in James' involvement in the case and decided to arrest him. James was taken into custody, and the prosecution announced its intention to seek the death penalty. Despite James continuing to deny guilt, the case still went to trial. The prosecution presented its theories, highlighting James' frequent outdoor activities with his dog, which had earned him the trust of local children, including Jessica. According to police, James had met Jessica while walking his dog and had struck up a conversation. He offered to take her to McDonald's, and she agreed because she knew him. After the meal, James allegedly invited Jessica to his home. While his wife was away, evidence had shown that Jessica was actually at James's house that day, as fibers from his living room carpet were found on her clothes. The investigation revealed that James might have tried to attack Jessica, but something went wrong. Forensic evidence indicated that the killer had strangled Jessica with their bare hands and pressed their palms against her face, possibly to silence her if she tried to scream. Panicked, the killer then placed Jessica's body in a trash bag and transported it to their car without arousing suspicion from the neighbors. The killer dumped her body near a water station, called 911 from a nearby gas station, and returned home. During the preliminary hearings, James's attorneys attempted to defend the evidence, arguing that there was no concrete proof of James' guilt. Although the judge accepted the evidence, the defense pointed out that in murder cases, the standard of proof is higher and more direct. Therefore, the possibility that James could avoid the death penalty was very large. A plea agreement was offered to James based on the circumstances surrounding the case. The deal required him to plead guilty to second-degree murder and accept a sentence of 40 years in prison without parole, thereby avoiding the death penalty. 2 years after the murder, in the summer of 1998, James accepted the deal. Although he was not required to provide details about the crime, he said that one of the reasons he accepted the deal was to spare Jessica's family the torment of the trial. The prosecution believed James showed genuine remorse for his actions and used the 911 call as evidence. The purpose of the call was unclear, but it suggested James was trying to alleviate his guilt. However, Jessica's parents were not satisfied with this deal because they had hoped for the death penalty and wanted James to confess to the crime. Despite this, James remained silent about the details of his actions. James did not fully serve his sentence. He died in November 2011 at the age of 49 from health problems, taking with him details of his crimes and motives. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of the Parente family. William Michael Parente was born on July 20, 1949, in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. His parents, Willie and Rulon Parente, raised him with values rooted in their family's history of law enforcement. His father, a New York trooper, played a significant role in shaping his upbringing. As an only child, William received his parents' undivided attention. He spent summers enjoying the sun with his family in Long Beach. William pursued his education at Brooklyn College and Brooklyn Law School, thanks in part to the financial support of his uncle, Anthony J. Russo. William worked in his uncle's Manhattan law office on the Avenue of the Americas. There, he built a reputation as a thoughtful lawyer and dedication to his family. William was known for his demeanor, courteous which extended to everyone. He worked diligently for long hours, but made sure not to overwork himself. Unlike many of his peers, he refrained from using profanity or engaging in post-work gatherings for drinks. His disciplined lifestyle and commitment to kindness set him apart in the legal community. Even on difficult days, William maintained his composure and treated everyone with respect. In 1977, after being admitted to the New York bar, William married Betty Mazzarella. He began his career at a prestigious Wall Street law firm but made a significant change in 1988. When Betty became pregnant with their first child, William decided to start his own private practice. This change happened around the same time the family moved to Garden City, New York, an affluent community in Nassau County, Long Island. Despite living in the suburbs, the William family remained connected to their Brooklyn roots. They regularly returned to their old neighborhood to enjoy local delicacies, reconnect with old friends, visit their mother, and relive cherished childhood memories. By the time he was 60, William Parente had become an experienced estate and tax attorney. He ran his practice from an office in a Queens shopping center. His wife, Betty Mazzarella, 58, dedicated her time to taking care of their home and organizing charity fundraisers in their local community. Betty was actively involved in church activities, which were an integral part of their neighborhood's social fabric. The couple had 2 daughters, Stephanie and Catherine. Stephanie, the elder daughter, was 19 years old and a sophomore at Loyola College, studying speech pathology with plans to pursue dentistry in the future. Her friendly nature made her well liked by her classmates and teachers. She also maintained close relationships with her friends back home in Garden City. Their younger daughter, Catherine, showed remarkable talent at just 11 years old, earning her admiration from teachers and staff at Garden City Middle School. Her exceptional abilities indicated a promising future ahead. In the later stages of his legal career, William became involved in what he called bridge loans. He acted as a financial intermediary, similar to a bank, allegedly using assets from investment portfolios under his management to finance these loans. When an investor asked for their money back, William Parente was unable to return the funds or explain why he couldn't. On April 15, 2009, William, along with his wife Betty and youngest daughter Catherine, took a trip to visit their eldest daughter Stephanie in Towson, planning to surprise her. They booked room 1029 at the Sharon Hotel, near the Talone Town Center Mall, with a reservation until the 19th. When they arrived, Stephanie's friend was surprised, given that classes had just resumed after the Easter break and Stephanie was busy preparing for a chemistry exam. The visit was unexpected, especially since the parents had already planned to visit on Friday the 17th to discuss Stephanie's study abroad plans in England. Despite the initial surprise, the visit seemed like a normal family reunion. However, what took place that day remains unclear. Based on the evidence, here is what happened. Betty Mazzarella Parente was the first victim. She was brutally assaulted and suffocated in bed on Sunday morning. Later, Catherine, the youngest daughter, met a similar fate, dying from the same violence as her mother. Catherine's body was placed beside her mother's. On Sunday afternoon, Stephanie arrived at the hotel after leaving her campus and tragically met the same demise as her mother and younger sister. Her body was laid beside theirs on the bed. None of the victims showed signs of struggle. No evidence of drugging or physical restraint was found. William Parente carefully planned the annihilation of his family. On that somber Sunday, around midnight, one of Stephanie's close friends and roommates grew worried about her absence from their dorm room. After hours of worrying, the roommate called the hotel room phone to reach Stephanie. The roommate knew Stephanie planned to return to the dorm to study for final exams, so they were surprised when William Parente, Stephanie's father, answered the call. William explained that Stephanie was staying at the hotel with family. The roommate accepted this excuse and ended the call, unaware that Stephanie was already dead. Later, the roommate thought back on the conversation and remembered that William's tone seemed unusual. On Monday morning, William Parente ended his life by using a knife he had bought at a nearby mall. He inflicted fatal injuries on himself in the hotel bathroom. When the family failed to check out, hotel staff became concerned. School Loyola College also raised concerns about Stephanie's unexplained absence from classes, especially since it was a crucial time for her final exams. The college contacted the hotel, requesting a welfare check on Stephanie and her family. At 3 p.m., a housekeeper tried to enter their 10th floor room but found the door locked and received no response. The housekeeper alerted other staff, and a hotel manager entered the room. The manager found William Parente's lifeless body in the bathroom, having taken his own life with a knife. The manager quickly called emergency services and continued to investigate. As he entered the room further, he found 3 bodies carefully arranged on one of the beds. The victims were Betty Mazzarella and her 2 daughters, Stephanie and Catherine. The Baltimore County Police were immediately called to the scene, and all other guests on the 10th floor were relocated as part of the investigation. The police also took the family's Mercedes-Benz SUV from the hotel parking lot. After investigating, they determined that William Parente had committed a murder-suicide on that Sunday. And the police found that the causes of death were asphyxiation and blunt force trauma. They believe that Betty and Catherine were the first victims, followed by Stephanie. The police think that one of William's last interactions was with Stephanie's boyfriend, who tried to call Stephanie around midnight. However, Stephanie had already been killed by her father by then. Shortly after the call, William likely went to the bathroom and took his own life using a knife he had bought earlier from the mall. It is believed that William Parente's decision to kill his family and then commit suicide may have stemmed from an investigation into his possible involvement in a major fraud. William Parente was accused of being part of a Ponzi scheme, a type of investment scam where money from new investors is used to pay existing ones, often resulting in huge financial losses. Investors have been scammed of around $20 million, with one investor claiming a loss of $450,000. Investigations showed that William had issued bounced checks totaling $245,000 to investors, leading to further complaints to the New York Attorney General's office. After William Parente's death, some investors came forward with losses totaling millions of dollars. A colleague of William's made a poignant observation: financial losses can be recovered, but the loss of human life is irreparable. Friends and family have struggled to overcome their feelings of grief following the horrific incident. A memorial service was held at Loyola College on Monday night to honor Stephanie's memory. The family William Parente home, once full of life, became a somber space filled with tributes such as flowers and candlelit vigils. A funeral service was held at St. Joseph's Church in Garden City to commemorate Betty and her daughters. According to reports, Catherine's middle school classmates were transported by bus to attend the service. Stephanie's college peers made a significant effort to join, driving from Talon and arriving as early as 4 a.m. for the morning ceremony. The family was laid to rest together at St. Charles Cemetery in East Farmingdale, New York. In contrast, William Parente received a separate, private funeral service at a different location. He was cremated, but the location of his ashes was not publicly disclosed. The horrific actions of this merciless perpetrator have caused immense distress for the victims and their loved ones.